Public members had the opportunity to submit emails to city staff. A report of all written comments were distributed to the Planning Commission members via email and posted to the city's website under documents received after published agenda. And before we take roll call, I just wanted to say really quickly, welcome to Bridget Lowe, our newest Planning Commissioner this evening, since this will be her first roll call. And I know we'll hear more from her later, but we're excited to see a new face. Welcome, Bridget. And with that, Ms.
So, Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Good evening, everyone. Present.
Commissioner Bonilla.
Hello, everyone. Ray is here.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldstein.
I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Lowe.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Okenda.
Present.
Thanks. Commissioner Stevens.
Present.
Thank you. Chair Roche.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to public comments. These are comments that are not on tonight's agenda, that are not an item on tonight's agenda. The public comment section provides an opportunity to address the Planning Commission on items not listed on the agenda. The Planning Commission welcomes your comments and requests that speakers present their remarks in a respectful manner. Speakers wishing to address the Planning Commission should limit their comments to 3 minutes. And now I'll ask Ms. Chan to moderate the public comment portion of the meeting. And again, if there are people waiting and listening online, this is for comments not to do with the item on the agenda this evening. Thank you. Ms. Chan.
Thank you, Chair. If you wish to speak and you're using the Zoom application, please click the raise hand button. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and use *6 to unmute yourself when called to speak. If you are streaming the meeting through Zoom on your computer, but dialing in via phone, please mute yourself so that there is no feedback sound during the meeting. If there is disruptive feedback or excessive noise during the meeting, your audio will be disabled. And I just want to repeat what Chair Roche just said, that this time for public comments is for anything that is not on the agenda. Okay, so Chair, at this time, nobody is raising their hand.
Great. That's what I see too. I figured if people are speaking, they're waiting to talk about the project tonight. So
thank you.
Okay, great. I don't see anything either. So let's close the public comment section. And let's move on to our first and only agenda item for this evening. And I believe it's Associate Planner Blanton that will be presenting this evening. Elizabeth, if you're there.
Actually, Elizabeth and I are going to tag team on this.
Oh, great.
I'm going to kick it off.
Jump in second.
All right, thank you.
That's right. We're going to so bear
good.
with us. Elizabeth's going to share her screen though, and it'll all be the same presentation, but I'm going to just do the introduction about the first several slides. First of all, for those of you who I don't know, I'm Jennifer Ott. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Development Services Director, and have one of my main jobs here at the city is to oversee the development of the 238 parcels. And we've been working on them. Well, many city staff have been working on these parcels for many, many years, but I've been here about 3 years and working on kind of moving forward with these parcels. So tonight we're here to have a work session on parcel group 6. I've been here before on different stages of parcel group 6, and we're going to talk about that, but we're getting closer. We have an actual project application, and I'm going to give a little bit of a history of how we got here. And so I'm going to give kind of that background a little bit on how we ended up where we are, and then Elizabeth's going to get into the details of the project. And I think we also have the applicant here, the developer, and so they're also available to maybe do a short presentation, I believe, Elizabeth, and answer questions, of course. So go ahead to the next slide. So just as some background for those of you who don't already know, I know many of you do, but the Caltrans purchased a lot of land in Hayward for a 238 bypass project, an actual freeway project through primarily the Hayward Hills. That in the 1960s, that ultimately was abandoned after quite a bit of community opposition and just wasn't able to move forward. And so there was a land use study done. So this is obviously well before my time here, but a lot of work. Our Deputy Director of Development Services, Sarah Bowser, worked on that land use study. So a lot of work that's gone into studying these sites. In 2016, the city and Caltrans actually entered into a purchase and sale agreement, essentially where the city now owns these parcels, and I'll show you where they are. There were 10 of them. We sold some to developers. Over 200 acres of land that's now in city ownership, kind of somewhat held in trust for Caltrans, though, because they have to meet certain purchase price minimums for them. But so the city owns these and has been working since then to see them developed in a number of different ways. And in 2017, there was actually a master development planning process that was started because one of the real reasons, and I'll get to this to the next slide, to kind of manage these properties from a city perspective was to have more local control, be able to be more responsive to the community, not have Caltrans just sell them off to the highest bidder, but to be able to really make sure we have qualified developers, make sure we're building in public amenities, and have the city really and the community benefit from the development of these parcels. That agreement ends. We have to sell these parcels for private development by the end of 2027. So we are somewhat on a timeline, but through COVID, we're able to extend that agreement to 2027. So have some time. Next slide. These are all of the parcels. There's 10 of them. 1 and 10 there is essentially the Sohei project that have already been sold to a developer. 2 was the True Life project. For those of you who've been following that parcel 2 has been sold. 3, parcel group 3 was here recently at the Planning Commission. So I know you're familiar with that and is getting close to entering into a development agreement and ultimately selling most likely to for affordable housing later this year. 5 is in an exclusive negotiating agreement with a developer. 7 was sold for the Subaru dealership. So they're all in different kind of stages of development. Parcel group 6 is obviously the one that we're here to talk about tonight. Parcel group 8 and 9 are closer to the 580 interchange there. 8 is we do have an exclusive negotiating agreement for affordable housing for a component of that, and then a pretty significant portion of open space that we're in negotiations with HARD for. And I say that, and I think it's important to take this within context a little bit to see all these parcels because a couple of the projects are being developed for instance, for affordable rental housing, whereas this parcel you'll see we're really targeting affordable home ownership. So I do want to bring that up, and that we aren't just looking at each of these parcels in a vacuum, but as a whole, and making sure that, and the city council is really wanting us to look at this, that we have open space, for instance, in parcel group 8, we have affordable rental housing on 3 and 8. And so we are trying to kind of create different public benefits on different parcels and meet different needs. Next slide. So some of those are obviously to facilitate the cohesive, productive use of land driven by a community vision. Whereas Caltrans would have really just sold these to the highest bidder. Eliminate neighborhood blight. There's a number of parcels that had significant blight and issues that we have already mitigated and are in the process of mitigating. Negotiate real estate transactions at no net cost to the city, and in some instances really also trying to develop excess land sale revenues to the city for public benefits. So for instance, the Sohei development, when it sold, some of the excess land value that went to the city after paying Caltrans back was actually used to help fund the navigation center for the homeless in the city. So these are, so there's some desire by the city to have sale proceeds that can be used for other public benefits, not just directly in these neighborhoods, but also throughout the community. And that's that last bullet of funding new community benefits. Again, not just on site like trails and parks. Hayward Barton downtown. It is closer to Hayward Barton. It's about a little over a mile, very close to CSU East Bay, about 2.5 miles to South Hayward Bart. And this is, it's obviously very centrally located, but it also, to get at some of the comments that we'll get to, it is not directly next to a BART station. So we wouldn't necessarily say that this is transit oriented development. We're very much focused on alternative transportation strategies, and we'll talk more about those. But this is on a hill. One of the real challenges for alternative transportation, like biking or even transit, where some transit vehicles don't want to go up Carlos B because of the wear and tear for those vehicles, is the hill and the topography and the location of this. And so I say that because that will influence kind of what kind of strategies we're able to adopt as we move forward with really trying to be more progressive about the transportation strategies we adopt here. Next slide. Here's the location, a little closer look at this. It was a former quarry. That's what you'll hear people also refer to this as the quarry site. Right at the kind of intersection of Carlos B and Outlook. It's about 30 acres. It has, and Elizabeth knows all the details of this, but the sustainable mixed use and open space and foothill trail overlay are the existing zoning districts. And I want to just take a second on that because you may hear from Sherman Lewis and the Hayward Area Planning Association, where that land use study, and really, we were inspired by his vision for this site. And that was in part why the zoning district was actually created and why this is adopted here. So we see very much the zoning being a reflection of some of his vision here. Really minimum densities that are a lot higher than other districts, especially in locations like this that are as far from BART. Open space designations to make sure we're preserving those riparian habitats. And so I just want to say that because the zoning is where you start with the vision. We've adopted a master development plan in addition to this, but I wanted to also acknowledge that there's a long history in why this was zoned SMU. And we were very clear with all developers, you are not to change the zoning, you must fit within this. And so we are very much trying to respect that initial vision. And this is large part because of Sherman Lewis's vision and HPCM's vision for this site. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth here, but a little bit on the background, the more recent background, so the city did approve a master development plan. I'm going to touch on that briefly, and then issued a request for proposals from developers for this land. We also kind of adopted a general plan, an addendum to the general plan environmental impact report that's studied very much in detail a lot of the environmental impacts, determined that there would be no more severe impacts or new impacts from the general plan EIR. And that was adopted in November 2019. The Planning Commission was part of that. We actually did a work session with the Planning Commission and it came back for adoption, a recommendation of adoption for the City Council. I know there are a lot of new faces and members, but I think some of you were here for that. And so there is a long history working closely with the Planning Commission on this property. The RFP was released very shortly after. We received 2 proposals that were really we didn't think met the city's needs for the property. And so we actually kind of did a lot of due diligence, talking to developers, and decided to issue what's called a request for qualifications. He said, let's get a developer in here that's very qualified in developing complex properties with lots of different constraints and demands, and let's work with that developer to try to develop a proposal that tries to balance a lot of those different things that the community and our council wants. They were due in June 2020, and then ultimately in September 2020, we entered into an exclusive negotiations right agreement with Integral Communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about Integral, but before I do that, I want to be really clear that that RFQ stated very clearly that there needed to be on-site affordable housing. So that's even above what we would require in our existing affordable housing ordinance. There needed to be a robust transportation demand management plan, which is just a fancy word for a transportation strategy to try to get some people out of their cars into alternative modes of travel. And that had to be funded through property assessments or fees, so that it had to be fully funded. And that is not something we require of all of our developers, to actually create a funding source for all of those things. And so we did say that was requirement. There are no gas utilities here required. That was part of the RFQ. We also said there needed to be creek setbacks. So a lot of we had to have a public park as well as significant trails. And so a lot of so I just wanted you to know that a lot of that got baked into that RFQ and is being required of this developer above and beyond what we would otherwise require of a private development. Next slide. And I just wanted you to see all these bullet points because even in the 3 years I've been working, I attended all of these meetings that are on here myself. Many of the staff that are here have also attended them. There was a pretty significant 238 Properties community meeting that was held November 2018. I think probably over 100 people showed up, and it was for all the parcels. Because I do want to also mention that this isn't just about the immediate neighborhood, but this is about how we can create development that meets the needs of the entire Hayward community. And so we really wanted to make sure we were hearing from the overall community what they wanted to see on these properties. And it was a lot of discussion about affordable housing, about trails and parks, things that you would expect. There was a community meeting held just for this site in April of 2019, a planning commission work session in July, a council economic development committee meeting in October. So this was all before the actual hearing to approve the master development plan for this site. Then ultimately the planning commission recommended in October 2019, council in November. And then we actually held another community meeting in February 2020. And I want to talk about this a little bit because there were some neighbors. I think you received an email from Daniel Hernandez, and he lives on, near Redstone, which is right behind this parcel. And there were concerns about cut through traffic, some concerns about noise impacts due to the project and construction. And so I myself went to their home. They had actually one of their biggest concerns was about the trail cutting through their backyard and crossing over the creek, and very concerned that we were going to take their property or that someone was going to build a trail in their backyard. And so, part of when you have this conversation about where the trail ends, we were very clear that this project was going to build a trail on its property. We weren't going to be taking anyone else's property, and we weren't going to be going off the site. And that was really, we were going to have a longer term relationship with HARD to build out the rest of that master plan. But we met with those neighbors in their home a couple times, and then ultimately at a community meeting really to focus on the cut through traffic. And so you'll see that overlook entrance is kind of shut down. It's only for emergency vehicle access. So and that was really in response to a pretty significant neighborhood concern about cut through traffic through Palisades down to Mission. Anyway, I know I want to keep going here, but I want you to know that there was a lot of discussion back and forth. And then the applicant, once they started, had a number of community meetings. And now obviously we're here for a planning commission work session. So also throughout this, I've probably met monthly with Sherman Lewis in HAPA, at least in the first year or two that I was here. Have met with him regularly. I'm very familiar with his vision. We have tried throughout this process to really adopt some of the spirit of what he has brought to attention. And we've had lots of other individual meetings with interested members of the public. And I've done a lot of those personally. Next slide. So we did end up adopting this master plan, and we created a pretty wide envelope because we weren't sure, we hadn't done all of the due diligence that a developer does, but we created this very wide envelope of housing because the council was very clear. We want to build housing. We want to help our community address the housing crisis. So we created up to 500 townhomes, multifamily units. We also said, hey, we'd love some student housing with 500 beds. We can talk a little bit more of that. That was not something that the development community was as interested in, but we created that possibility, preserving over 12 acres of dedicated open space around the riparian corridor. And when we say riparian corridor, we mean essentially the creek that you've gotten some letters from Bruce King related to the sensitivity of those areas, but also neighborhood park, public trails, and then multimodal accessibility. So really a robust transportation plan to address, to really try to make this as sustainable a project as possible. Next slide. Integral communities was ultimately selected. So we were very particular. We wanted to make sure that any developer that worked with us had experience dealing with larger projects like this, especially focused on more transit, so that this project is not necessarily transit oriented, but could help us kind of create a more progressive plan. And they specialize in major master plan communities around BART and around the core of the Bay Area. Significant experience. They've done the Bayside project at Newark, an actual TOD project, over 1,800 units, Milpitas transit-oriented specific plan. So a lot of really very relevant experience for a project of this complexity and size. And then also had some local Hayward experience re-entitling to the 200 homes in the cannery. Next slide. So I think this is when I get to turn it over to Elizabeth, where she's going to. So now that we have that relationship, and I've seen some correspondence, so I just want to be clear what an exclusive negotiating agreement, and the way I kind of think of it is, it's essentially kind of an engagement. You tell a developer, and this is something that the council does, and to kind of try to think of this a little bit is, there's two hats that the city's wearing. One is the property owner hat and one is the regulator. So if you can almost even think of, like, I'm kind of wearing more of that property owner hat, Elizabeth's wearing a little more of the regulator hat of what you can do here, what you can't, processing the applications. The ENA is really that property owner hat saying, yes, we're interested in working with you, Integral. You have a lot of great experience. We think you're really qualified. But it's going to be we're going to get engaged. And so we're not going to talk to any other developers. But through that ENA, there's no obligation to approve a project, to approve a development agreement. But yes, we're engaged. Ultimately, we are working with them in good faith to try to come to an agreement on a project and to a development agreement. And that disposition and development agreement is the marriage contract. So that is a legally binding contract where we say, we will sell you this land under these conditions, and you have to develop it according to these conditions. And that we are ongoing and we're in negotiations with them. But just so you kind of understand a little bit of the two hats that we're wearing in a public-private partnership like this. So I will be quiet and turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, Elizabeth Blanton. For the folks that have not met me yet, I'm a senior planner with the city. And now, as Jen said, we're going to review Integral's formal project application for the Parcel Group 6 site. So I'll note here, this application has not yet been deemed complete by the Planning Division. However, staff feels that it's important to allow the Commission this opportunity to weigh in on the plans now before they come back to you during the adoption hearing process. So here on this slide, we can see Integral's proposed site plan. It includes a total of 298 residential units that range in size from 1 to 4 bedroom units, and 30 of these units will be affordable on-site ownership units. Additionally, the plan includes a public park near Carlos B, a construction of a portion of the Foothill Trail that will loop around the entire development, and a private central park. And we'll look at more detailed plans for each of these spaces in the slides that follow. Now, you'll notice that the proposed program of 298 residential units is less than the 500 multifamily units and 125 student units described in the Parcel Group 6 master plan. And again, the reason for this is because a more detailed analysis of the site constraints, including these steep manufactured slopes that are kind of shown in this medium green color with lines through it, that were left over from the previous quarry site, resulted in a smaller area of developable land than we previously thought. So further, when netting out the land necessary for internal roadways, parks and trail, natural open spaces, this really only left about 7 acres for the buildings themselves. So as a result, the proposed plan of 298 units, along with a public park and trail system, is the highest and best use achievable while still maintaining the general consistency with the vision of the approved master plan. Now, the only vehicular access to the site will be via a new access road stemming off of Carlos B. Boulevard. And again, this decision was made in direct response to community concerns we heard about the potential of cut-through traffic using Palisade Street or Overlook Avenue if the development were directly connected to those streets. Additionally, staff and the applicant support the residents' direct recommendation of turning Overlook into a right turn only onto Carlos B. And again, this will help prevent traffic from Mission from using Palisade to get up to either this new development or to CSU East Bay beyond. So the proposed development, known as Rose Hills, will feature 3 different residential development types situated around a series of trails and open spaces, consistent with the dense walkable neighborhood that was envisioned in the master plan. The UA Rose is the least dense development type and is composed of 3-story townhomes. The buildings feature large outdoor covered patios and a softer urban aesthetic with wood siding, stucco, brick, and metal accents. And as you can see in this key map in the corner, the building type will be situated around the outer edge of the project, which, along with the project's perimeter landscaping, creates a softer transition to the riparian corridor below and the single-family neighborhoods beyond. The UA penthouse buildings will be clustered in the center of the development. These are 4-story structures designed after a European-style carriage house that has residential entries facing the street and garages facing inward around a central court. These homes would feature large outdoor balconies, rooftop decks, and again, these brick, wooden, stucco, and steel accents. The UA Solo is the 3rd development type that will be clustered kind of towards the eastern end of the development. And these structures, again, we see 3-story townhomes, but this time they have ground floor micro units. And this really provides an opportunity for affordable units by design and aging in place. Like the other development types, these structures will again use these same elements of stucco, wood, and metal to create architectural interest and then visual consistency with the rest of the development. So as I mentioned earlier, the development also includes a robust system of public and private open space, with the vast majority of it being open to the public. So this includes a public neighborhood park, approximately 2 acres in size, located near Carlos B and Palisade, a fitness trail that loops around the entire development, and a central park for future residents to enjoy. The neighborhood park at the base of the hill has been designed to include the types of park features that the community has expressed the most interest in. So this includes a community building, some different play areas, ball courts and fields, and a dog park. Multiple bike and pedestrian connections from this public park to Carlos B, to Palisade Street, to the Foothill Trail, and to the proposed development itself will ensure that everyone in the neighborhood has easy access to this amenity. And additionally, I'll mention that there will be ample on-street parking along that main access road that will help prevent spillover parking into the adjacent single-family residential neighborhood, which again, we've heard is a concern. So what results is an attractive community gathering space that will benefit the entire neighborhood. This park will ultimately be owned and maintained by HARD. So HARD staff has given us feedback throughout this process. And I'll mention here, the HARD board will also have the opportunity to review these plans and provide feedback later this fall and prior to the city's adoption hearings for this project. So in the center of the development, between those UA penthouse buildings, will be a private central park. While this is smaller than the larger public neighborhood park at the base of the hill, this will provide open space, barbecues, and picnic areas for future residents to enjoy. By being centrally located and connected to the site's larger trail system, the Central Park will be easily accessible from any building in the development. Speaking of which, here we can see that extensive bike and pedestrian trail system proposed for the development, which links together the public neighborhood park, the central private park, and some smaller seating and lookout areas to the neighborhood beyond. As was mentioned earlier, the Parcel Group 6 properties are located within the SD7 zoning overlay district, which requires that there's a portion of the Foothill Trail constructed through the site. So consistent with HARD's master plan for the Foothill Trail, the proposed project will include a publicly accessible fitness trail that loops around the perimeter of the development, kind of connecting Carlos B at the bottom, and then also switchbacking down through some PG&E land that is just adjacent to the site. You can see kind of in this blue color at the bottom. As you might be able to see in what looks like some tiny sections at the top of the screen, portions of the trail will widen beyond just a two-way bike and pedestrian path to include some fitness stations with workout equipment for residents and members of the public to enjoy. And this trail connection, which is at the base of the project at Carlos B, will link this portion of the Foothill Trail to southern sections of the trail that run through the Parcel Group 5 project and parcel groups further south. And while not contemplated as part of this project for reasons that Jen explained earlier, an eventual Foothill Trail connection to the north is also planned by HARD. And through discussions with the community, different locations for this future northern connection are currently being considered by HARD. So in addition to all of the public open space, the development will also include a number of sustainability measures in alignment with both the adopted master plan and the underlying sustainable mixed use designations. So first, as was said earlier, the project is required to include a robust transportation demand management, or what we call a TDM plan. The goal of this plan really is just to reduce vehicle trips by identifying measures that promote transit, ride share, walking, biking, and carpooling. Some examples of TDM strategies might include an electric bike share program, transit passes for residents, or a guaranteed ride home program. Now, while not available tonight, a draft TDM plan is expected to be brought to city staff by the applicant shortly, which will allow the city to more specifically analyze exactly how many vehicle trips might be avoided. In the meantime, the applicant and their TDM consultant, Alltrans, are here this evening and can speak further to some of the initial TDM concepts that are being explored. Now, in addition to reducing vehicle and car trips, the project also proposes to preserve some of that natural vegetation around the creek bed to the north of the project site. And in response to comments that the city has received from Friends of the San Lorenzo Creek, from the Sierra Club, and from others, the applicant and city are currently in discussions to figure out how best to restore some of the natural plantings beyond the extent of the project down closer to the creek. The project will further include some solar panels, electric vehicle charging, high efficiency appliances, drought tolerant landscaping, and all electric construction. Now, being that this is a work session and the development application is not yet deemed complete, some of these project details are still in process and are being worked out. But as a result, staff welcomes any feedback the commission may have on this topic. So looking at our new favorite topic with SB 330, objective standards, here looking at the sustainable mixed use zoning district, we can see that the proposed development meets almost all of the objective standards with the exception of parking. Now, unlike in other zoning districts, the SMU district actually imposes a parking maximum on developments. So it specifies that you can only have a maximum of 1.3 parking spaces per studio or 1-bedroom unit, and a maximum of 1.5 spaces for units with 2 or more bedrooms. And the reason for these parking maximums, again, is to align with the intent of the sustainable mixed use district, which aims to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles and into more sustainable modes of transportation. So now, given the unit count and breakdown of units for this project, only a maximum of 439 total garage parking spaces would be allowed. So the current plans propose 498 enclosed parking spaces, which will need to be reduced to meet the requirements of the code. Now, to help offset this reduction in garage parking, and again, to avoid spillover parking into the adjacent neighborhoods, 146 on-street parking spaces are proposed across the development. And again, that TDM plan that we discussed on the last slide will make it more feasible to travel to and from the site without needing a car. Now, as the Assistant City Manager covered earlier in the presentation, there has been a significant amount of community meetings and outreach related to this project, and this slide summarizes some of the main comments that we received over the process. So the community expressed, again, general support for the project being developed consistently with that sustainable mixed-use general plan and zoning designation. In addition, they wanted to see a property assessment or fee to fund the new and improved public transit and TDM options. Many people spoke about traffic and parking, wanting to incorporate TDM measures to reduce the amount of traffic generated by the project itself, wanting to see traffic calming measures to prevent the likelihood of cut-through traffic through the existing surrounding neighborhoods, and strategies to prevent spillover parking. Others suggested dedicated bike lanes to CSU East Bay, affordable housing units on site, including units for students and faculty members, and walkable retail opportunities. And then restoring that riparian corridor, the creek corridor, was a recurrent theme, as was the need for publicly accessible trails, open space, and parks. So here we can see throughout the process and the evolution of the project, the project has either directly addressed or is in the process of trying to address many of these community recommendations and concerns. Now, as mentioned earlier, vehicular traffic to and from the development will be limited to the new project access road. So again, trying to cut down on that cut-through traffic through the Palisade and Overlook neighborhood. And further, as specifically requested by the neighborhood, only right turns will be allowed onto Overlook from Carlos B. Opposite, only allowed from Overlook onto Carlos B. A robust TDM plan is in the works, again, to reduce auto trips and get people into ride sharing, carpooling, using transit, walking, or biking. And again, as was mentioned earlier, this will be funded through property assessments or fees. The natural vegetation will remain around that sensitive riparian corridor, and the city and the developer are currently in discussions to figure out how best to restore some natural plantings between the edge of the grading of the project and the creek itself. The project will construct almost a mile of the foothill trail for public use, and further, HART is exploring alternative future northern connections for the trail in alignment with community preferences. And finally, we also have heard some concerns about noise from construction and noise from the residences themselves. And this will be regulated in part through the city's noise ordinance, and then also through specific conditions of project approval that would limit the levels of noise and the hours of noise through the construction period and then even after. So following feedback that we received tonight at this work session, the applicant will work towards a complete application, which will include a final local transportation analysis, a TDM plan, and related conditions of project approval. At that point, the project will come back before the Planning Commission at a public hearing for you to provide a recommendation to the council regarding final adoption. So to conclude my presentation, I'll leave you with three main questions that staff has for the commission this evening. First, does the commission have any overall comments, questions, or reactions to the current project plans and or their alignment with the approved Parcel Group 6 master plan? Second, what types of TDM measures would the commission like to see to reduce auto dependency and help facilitate walking, biking, taking transit, ride sharing, and carpooling? And then third, does the commission have any comments, questions, or reactions to the proposed open spaces, and in particular, all of these public open spaces proposed as part of the project? Now, before diving into commissioner questions, if the chair will allow, the applicant would also like to give a brief presentation to the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Otto, Ms. Blanton. And yes, we'd love to hear from the applicant this evening. Thank you. If you're there.
Yeah, hi, this is Steve, if you guys can hear me.
Yep. Hi, Steve. Go ahead.
Hi, great. I probably could share my screen. Nothing as amazing and fancy as what Elizabeth and Jennifer just submitted, but let me click on this and we'll get my, it's just the words of what I was going to explain here. See if you guys can see that screen. And see if I can get to that document so I can go through the pages a little better. Okay. All right. Can you guys still see the Integral Communities blue screen?
Yep, it's there.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so just a real quick background on Integral. You guys touched on it a bit, and we do have some, larger transit-oriented projects throughout California. The company's been developing and repurposing property for residential development for a very long time throughout California. Our local office is in Danville, and excited to be working on this project in Hayward. Myself, I was involved with, worked with Lion Homes in getting the Sohey project entitled just down the street, part of the overall Highway 238 Caltrans property project. And that was a really great project to work on, and got to know a lot of the staff in the city really well. So have had some personal experience in Hayward. So just going through some bullet points, don't want to rehash a lot of what was stated in that great presentation to commission, but just the way we would think of this project is a walkable community of 298 homes with pedestrian frontages, pocket parks throughout, lots of paseos in between buildings to encourage folks to talk to each other. And then outside of the paseos where you have sidewalks, they're actually separated sidewalks, and not just concrete right onto the curb and gutter, but actually landscaping in between the sidewalk and the small driveways. The street widths are minimized as much as possible, but still meet requirements of the fire department and public works, and then of course the public park and public trail system. The community will be all electric, as was stated, and there will also be roof-mounted solar panels, not a field separated of solar panels, but actually up on the roofs of the buildings. We propose no changes whatsoever to the zoning district. Propose no changes to the general plan. The site is about 29.79 acres. About 16 of that is developable. And it comes out to about 35 units per acre density. The minimum was 25, so we're 10 units over per acre over the minimum density required for the project. One thing that our company does on all projects is we're really into avoidance of any sort of sensitive habitats. We don't want to harm any of existing habitats, and look at those really as an amenity, actually, and show that we're willing to preserve those types of areas. So in this case, the project is designed to meet all setbacks required from that creek corridor. There's geotechnical requirements, there's habitat requirements, riparian tree requirements that we need to stay away from, and our full intention to stay away from all of those areas with the footprint of this project. About 2 acres of parks when you combine the public park and which will be managed by HARD, and then the smaller parks will have public accessibility but will be owned and maintained by the HOA. It's about 4,000 or so linear feet of the foothill trail that goes around the project. Really good distance, and also with some of the terrain, a great after work, quick early morning weekend hiking experience, especially with amazing views of the riparian area, and then maybe a couple good spots might be able to get a view of the bay. That creek corridor ends up being about 7 acres of preserved open space. 10% of the units, and actually just a tad over that, 30 of the units will be offered at below market rate to buyers, and it'll be the pricing that's required by the City of Hayward's affordable housing guidelines. Still in discussions with the city on that final program, but we definitely know it will be 30 units. And then several of the other units will be what you may have heard a little earlier, a term called affordable by design, because there's some very small square footages, very untypical of residential development these days. There's several units that are, just 429 square feet, and a lot of units that are under 1,200. And so just by the nature of how small they are, they would be more affordable than a typical 3,000 square foot units that you may see in other developments. And then this is a really important part of the project that we're excited about, the traffic demand management plan. Now, the TDM will be ultimately managed by the HOA, but the HOA will hire a management consulting firm, and they are available on the call here if need be. But they're not an employee, they're not going to be on site, but they will be funded by the HOA to develop this extremely robust plan to reduce single car trips, which is, it's challenging on a site like this where there's not a lot of amenities outside of the property line and a very steep hill. So it leans itself towards being an automobile type of community based on the geography, but the TDM program will absolutely aid in reducing some of those trips. So ultimately, the goal is to promote walking, promote biking, taking transit, and several other options. So what's going on right now is we, Integral, are funding a project-specific local transportation analysis, or an LTA report. That's actually going to be prepared by the city, and the consultant will be selected by their city, but we're funding that. It'll focus on pedestrian and bicycle access safety, vehicle access, traffic, opportunities to reduce project-generated trips traveled, and just look at the overall general community from a traffic and transit standpoint. So the next step is that in the TDM report, which is being done by our consultant, we'll take into consideration the data and the findings that are in that LTA, which is not yet complete. And in the TDM, we'll include a menu of actions and tools that will actually be implemented by the community to reach the goals that will be set by that LTA report. Looks like, typically we're trying to reduce the trips by what would normally be expected, reduce those trips by, I believe it's like 9% or so would be kind of a target goal. But again, that hasn't been set until we get that LTA report completed. Some sample TDM items include, starting off right out the gate for a buyer, they would be signing a disclosure. They're going to get a large stack of all kinds of disclosures, but one of them will be, you could call it like a green travel pledge. And it's going to state, look, if you have an RV and 5 cars and you like to race your car up and down Carlos B, this is not the place for you to live. You just realize that. And we're telling you that, and you're signing a document acknowledging that. And then there'll be a TDM coordinator, a manager who actually will be in perpetuity part of the HOA. It's actual, person and company that'll be involved in this going forward, and they will help, help plan routes to work, routes to schools with the community as requested. They're there as a voice that can be reached out to, can show up to HOA meetings, can send out e-blasts, etc. And then some of the tools that we could use that we're considering that would be within the HOA budget and seem to make sense, and there'll be some flexibility in this program, is for one is work from home incentives. So the community already has a lot of amenities outside, so people do work from home, want to take a break. It's a great place to work from home. And inside the design of the homes, there'll be space for an office and comfort and levels of comfort to at least promote that as much as possible. And then also not just individual calls to Lyft and Uber from the residents, but the HOA can help facilitate large volume trips with Lyft and Uber, and maybe even start to get a dedicated Lyft and Uber driver into the community, and not just have it be everyone faring for themselves. There'll be subsidized transit opportunities, which means either a discount or funding of a Clipper card, again funded through the HOA. This is my last slide here. There's also bike use incentives, which have been used in other parts of the Bay Area, where the TDM coordinator, again, being crucial to this whole process, can set up apps that will track bike usage, and basically the users can get points and use those towards monetary benefits at local Hayward businesses, just to entice folks to use their bike. They also can help coordinate rideshare, carpool, school rides, in bulk, reaching out to the residents. And the last one I thought was really ingenious that we could consider doing is consolidated errands and deliveries. So the HOA and the TDM management company can coordinate like with Safeway or with CVS and go, look, we've got 10 families that need stuff, and if you could deliver all that on Tuesday, for instance. And so that would eliminate the trips to go to those stores, and then have those deliveries show up to the community building. And the community building is centrally located, very easy to walk to, quite pleasant to walk to. Have folks go there and pick up their deliveries at the building. And that would reduce traffic inside the project, reduce trips outside the project, and can all, again, be coordinated, managed, monitored by the TDM company. So, again, a really exciting menu of possibilities there. And, that program, the TDM plan will be finalized once we get the LTA done and present that to the city as soon as possible. That's all I have from a, verbal presentation. I definitely have some other exhibits if we want to get into it with any questions, but I'll pass it back to you folks.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks to the staff too for the for all the work and the presentation. And I wanted to ask, since this is a work session, Jeremy, should I go to public comment first, or should we just go ahead with commissioner questions and feedback at this time? Since we're not having a vote on this later, this is just a discussion. Jeremy or Joe, do you have a input on that?
Yeah, as long as you do open a public comment period at some point, if you want to do it now or after questions, that's up to you. Okay,
because I just thought that way we could sort of really get into discussion and not have to worry about going back, and we get to hear from the public as part of our discussion as well. So if the commissioners are okay with that, okay, thanks. I got some nods and some thumbs up. Then let's go ahead, Denise, if you're ready, let's go ahead and open public comment for this item. Let's see, the public is now invited to comment on this item. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak, and I will ask Ms. Chan to take over that section of it.
Thank you, Chair. If you wish to speak and you're using the Zoom application, please click the raise hand button. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and use *6 to unmute yourself when called to speak. If you are streaming the meeting through Zoom on your computer, but dialing in via phone, Please mute yourself so that there is no feedback sound during the meeting. If there is disruptive feedback or excessive noise, your audio will be disabled. Okay, so at this time, we have currently 3 hands up. I'm going to call on the phone number that ends in 341. Please unmute yourself. All right, phone number with the last 3 numbers, 341. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm representing the University Campus Neighborhood Association, and we have been talking to Hayward since 2017 about the traffic, the noise.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Can you give me your name, please? Could you give us your name?
Velda Go.
Thank you.
Thank you. And when the 2nd Street development was completed, Campus Drive was not considered. As a result, Campus Drive is now like a freeway. People are racing literally from 2nd all the way to Highland, literally going 50 miles an hour. We can prove that because the city installed an LED speeding sign right before the existing light, and they added a lane, so there's 2 lanes going up. My concern is that with all of the wonderful things that were added for Overlook and Palisade to prevent disruptive traffic patterns on their street, there is nothing being considered for Campus Drive. It is impossible to speak to your neighbors. It literally sounds like a freeway. People are speeding. You can't cross the street. They've jumped the curb. We have a long litany of accidents that we have submitted to the city of Hayward. And I think that if Campus Drive is not considered, it obviously has been a cut through as a result of the 2nd Street project. And I'm sure if there are no measures put in from this new Parcel 6 development, it is only going to get worse. So I have a long list of things, but I understand that we only have 3 minutes, and I have well documented this along with our neighbors in terms of please consider Campus Drive, because it absolutely has been used as a cut through. When you add people going to a public park, they are now racing up the street in motorcycles, blasting their music. As I said, they jumped the curb. They've, hit our cats. They're hitting deer. It's just a very untenable situation. And we cannot walk on our street now the way we used to be able to walk on our street. So our neighborhood is really being adversely affected. And with these new people coming in, all their visitors, the business people that will be servicing them, and adding a park where public people will be coming in and celebrating, if nothing is added for Campus Drive, it's going to make our street very unwelcoming and unsafe. Did you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
So that's what I hope, that it can be considered. We've already talked to Integral. We've talked to Elizabeth Blanton. We've talked to the traffic
Oh, Ms. Go, excuse me, your time is up. I need you to wrap it up.
I've wrapped it up, and what I want to say is I hope there's going to be some action, and let me know what the follow-up would be, please.
Thank you for your calling in tonight.
All right. The next caller is Shavania Reyna. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good evening. I'm Shivani Rena. I'm an architect and urban planner from UC Berkeley. I've been working with Sherman at the Hayward Area Planning Association on sustainability and mobility for the past year. Having reviewed this proposal in detail, I can confirm that Rose Hills is an environmentally destructive and unaffordable project with a high cost to both people and the environment. And it's not unique in this regard. It maintains the status quo of auto dependency, unaffordable housing, and unsustainable living. It is criminal to approve a housing project that builds 298 expensive houses on a site that can accommodate about 460 affordable homes. I mean, you're promising 30 at the moment, especially given the dire housing shortage that plagues Hayward. The Planning Commission of Hayward is uniquely positioned to correct this and set an example for city planning that tackles the Bay mounting affordable housing crisis, as well as humanity's greatest existential crisis, climate change. The thing is that Rose Hills can be modified. It can be modified to promote sustainable mobility, besides this superficial TDM stuff, reduce car use without sacrificing convenience, increase affordability, reduce pollution, and protect the beautiful foothill trail and creek. Modifications capable of major impact can be achieved through innovative yet simple concepts such as unbundling, which divorces the cost of parking from the cost of housing. And these changes can be made without changing the marketability, without reducing the parking within what's allowed with zoning. All we ask is give people choice. We urge the Planning Commission today to uphold its commitment to serving the people of Hayward and driving Hayward forward based on Hayward's climate action plan and the Housing for All plan. Pragmatism might require following the market, but if the market made a profit building a coal-fired power plant, would you support it? Now, HAPA has worked hard and long to find a progressive developer. We found one, and they needed assurances from the city concerning CEQA. The city did not make any such effort to find a sustainable developer, and hence we're where we are today. The thing is that pragmatism for the future requires major modifications be made to Rose Hills, and we sincerely hope the Planning Commission makes the right recommendation. We need housing for people, not for cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyna. Please mute yourself. Thank you. The next caller is Bruce King. Bruce, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, this is Bruce King from Friends of San Lorenzo Creek. This is a really special site. It's got 1/3 of a mile of tributary of Ward Creek. It's a creek that's in a ravine that's up to 100 feet deep. It's got oak bay woodland habitat up and down the creek banks. It's very pristine. But unfortunately, the soil and habitat on the top of bank was wiped clean by the past quarry and the removal of the mountaintop, essentially. So what Friends of San Lorenzo Creek, we don't currently support this plan because the plan doesn't show restoration of the soil and habitat between the top of bank where the trees, existing trees of the creek ravine end, and where the sloped excavation begins for the trail that goes around the site. So there's a pretty extensive area there where there's no plan for the soils that have been scraped clean and no plans for replanting the native plants. We did hear tonight that Elizabeth said, and I think Steve Jones from Integral told me that they were looking at how they could put native plants in there to restore habitat. But that's really an important element of a riparian corridor where wildlife and habitat can be restored. And it's unfortunate the state and the city haven't taken action on this to clearly state that objective. I'm not sure where else in the United States we can remove a mountaintop and not do some restoration. The other aspect is human use in this area. People will use these trails, but they will also likely want to approach the creek and go down towards the creek. We don't want them to damage habitat, so we probably want to direct where they go with possibly dirt paths or signage. We definitely don't want people just marching down these creek banks because they're so steep, they will damage the creek banks. I've gone down to the bottom of the creek. It's very steep, almost dangerous. You slip, you can easily slide into the creek, and we don't want people throwing garbage in the creek. So we need to kind of control what people are doing there and have some plan for that. And then the last thing is the foothill trail. We've asked the city, we've asked hard The city ordinance for the Foothill Trail shows it crossing the creek. We've asked both those agencies, the city and HARD, why the trail isn't shown going across the creek, why it's shown going down to the plunge instead. We haven't gotten an answer. So I'm not suggesting which is the best route, but it should be assessed why we're not crossing the creek along the PG&E alignment and going over into the Ward Creek Canyon. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Please mute yourself. All right. I'm calling on Ann Grove. Ann, I'm sorry, with Grove Way. Please unmute yourself, Ann.
Hi, Dr. Maris here, Ann Maris. I'm a local person here. I went to Cal State East Bay. I've also taught there as a professor. And I care a lot about the area, just like you've heard from Bruce King, Friends of San Lorenzo Creek, and from Professor Sherman Lewis from HPCM. So, I have my own personal comments, but also I just want to ask you to, continue listening to those local experts who are volunteering their time because they care so deeply about the area and about the environment. I think it's kind of the environment is sort of, swished over sometimes. And this was a quarry. So, the quarry removed all of the topsoil. And so really there's a lot of restoration that's going to be required. And the restoration that we're talking about, the creek itself, like Bruce said, is very deep set. It has native plants currently in it. What Friends of San Lorenzo Creek is recommending is that the native habitat restoration take place between that top of bank, at the very top of that deep ravine, and where the development starts. So there's sort of a nomad's land that has not been planned for in between the development and the top of bank. And thank you, Stephen Jones. He's committed to putting some native plants there. And so we just want to encourage that and encourage Hayward to require that. It seems like from our, what I've observed, that a lot of the attitude is that if something's already been destroyed, it's destroyed. The developer can come in and build and nobody has any responsibility because the habitat's already gone. And so what would be really great in 2021, when we're in a time of change, is to take, more responsibility maybe than you have to. Maybe, restore, like in the plans, for example, I see drought resistant plantings, but then all the pictures have irrigated lawns of non-native European grasses. It's 2021. We need to recognize that these artifacts like lawns are from colonialism, where we took resources instead of protecting the native plants, animals, and people. Native grasses perform a special function in the ecosystem. Our pollinator populations are crashing. Our natural waterways are too polluted to drink, so we're piping our water in. So, and in my last few seconds, I want to mention that I didn't hear a lot about common meeting places. If I, as a resident and a teacher and a student here, let's open up. How do you keep people from driving? Provide the services right there. Where's our common meeting places? Where's the coffee shop, the gym? Services that people have to drive to get. Why can't we have more community there and not just housing? And I think in the HPCM plan, there was a lot more.
Excuse me, Ms. Maris.
Yeah.
You need to wrap it up, please.
Okay, so that was the conclusion. In the HPCM plan, there's a lot more community. Thank you.
Thank you. Please mute yourself, Ann. All right, I'm going to call on Miguel and Tamara Flores. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, how are you? This is Miguel, and I have Tamara here, my wife. So we've been listening to all the comments, and actually, first of all, before I say anything else, I would like to thank Jennifer and Elizabeth for including a lot of the comments, and also Integral for including a lot of the comments that us, the neighbors, directly in the vicinity of the parcel 6 have been putting to the city. And we are happy to see this development. We live here in this area. We've been living here for a while already, and we love this area. And so that's why we appreciate that our comments are being heard, and we're in contact with a lot of the neighbors here, and we've heard a lot of positive things. The project, it's not perfect, but it is a step in the right direction. I do agree with a lot of the comments that have been said about the natural creek area and things like that. In fact, the creek runs through my backyard. So, I'm particularly concerned about that as well, the environmental aspect of it. So it's something that we totally agree that needs to get acknowledged early on in the project so that no more damage is done to what is already there. So we want to preserve the beautiful environment. And when you live in the vicinity of these natural resources, you see all the wildlife, you see all the during the certain times of the year, that there's going to be turkeys running in a certain area, or, they have their own little trail already made. So, and, I'm just saying that there's things that we would like to get preserved as well, but we are also about progress and change, because we don't want Hayward to get stuck, or we want to see it more developed, but we also want to not be so affected by these projects. And I think that's pretty much all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please mute yourself. Thank you. All right. Chair, at this time, nobody else has raised their hand.
Okay, thank you. Yep, I don't see any other hands either. Thank you for all the colors for your comments this evening. And I'm going to go with no other hands. I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment for this item. And let's move on to commissioner questions and feedback. Since it's a work session, it's just a discussion at this point. I guess we can sort of make all of our comments at this section. There's no voting at this time. So let's see. Go ahead. Let me go back to my commissioners. Okay. Commissioner Stevens, why don't you go ahead? I couldn't tell who went up first because I was in a different window, but Commissioner Stevens, why don't you start?
I think Commissioner Ali Sullivan was before me.
Okay. All right. He says go ahead. All right. Thank you for keeping me honest there. I'll go to you next, Commissioner Ali Sullivan. So go ahead, Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So I'd like to first disclose that I talked to Professor Lewis, as well as I'm colleagues with LSA Associates. I do a lot of work with them, but I do not believe this compromises my ability to comment here tonight. First off, I'd just like to say this whole TDM plan, in my opinion, is really a bandage for a really poor plan. We seem to have this race to build homes and create density, but we don't look at the site we're actually trying to develop on. So we have 24 dwelling units per acre on a hillside site that's 200 feet above Mission Boulevard. So that just by very nature really makes it difficult to actually have any form of walking or biking connection between Mission and this site. I would even argue an electric scooters or electric devices, if those are going to be used, there's going to have to be some significant improvements to the roadway connections to make that even a plausible item. And the other thing that I find it's really frustrating with this conversation is we talk about restoring riparian corridors. And there's this funny belief, I think, that the wildlife follows the riparian corridor, and the riparian corridor is isolated to the creek. Well, I live on Ward Creek, and I can tell you there's a lot of animals that are in my backyard. So I think I don't understand this whole conversation. This whole all these hills and the foothills of Hayward have been completely cut up by these developments. The other item I find a little disingenuous is on Plan SP3. It talks about a reserving of 7.9 acres of open space. Yeah, that's open space, but as one of the callers mentioned, that's very, very steep, rugged terrain, which really isn't usable by anybody. I think in looking at the architecture, I noticed somebody mentioned the 4-story carriage house is some form of a European form of architecture. I've been to Europe many times, all over Europe. I've never seen an uninspiring building that looks like that. Finally, I think this 298 units that's proposed here, I noticed that there's a proposed traffic signal that's on Carlos B. I'd love to see if the warrant analysis actually illustrates that. And I guess I'm fundamentally confused. We're adding a new intersection on an arterial roadway when there's a perfectly good connection at Overlook Avenue. And while as I respect the concern about the cut-through traffic, what happens to all the folks that are traveling up and down Carlos B, which is a significantly larger population than those that live on Palisades and those other areas there? I guess I'm just confused because, you know, traffic engineering typically dictates that we don't create another conflict point adjacent to an existing intersection on an arterial corridor. I also don't really understand why portions, I mean, I get the trail system, but this trail system seems pretty isolated to me, to this community. It doesn't seem to be connected to everyone else or farther up the hill. There is no connectivity up and down Carlos B and Hayward Boulevard to this. And I also heard somebody mention that HARD was actually going to be maintaining some of these parks. I guess I'm kind of confused about that as well, because this park seems like it's fairly insular to this development. So I'm not sure why the taxpayers are paying to maintain a park that's really for a private development. And then the final item, in section 20 of the addendum to the CEQA document, it talks about wildfire risk. And it cites that this project is within the wildland urban interface. And it states that this design is consistent with the 1993 fire policy, which I suspect relates to roadway widths and things like that. But I guess on Monday and Tuesday night, it was very, very windy up here. And I'm not sure that if there was a fire burning, if this whole hillside wouldn't go up, because there is a lot of dead wood and debris here. And I'm not sure why this hillside in this area is any different than a Fountain Grove up in Santa Rosa, when in 2017 that all went up. So I guess I don't understand how we can be developing within the wildland interface given all the different conditions that are moving forward. So thank you.
Commissioner Stevens, would you like me to respond to a couple of your comments?
I would love to.
Okay. Is that okay, Chair?
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Okay, there's a couple things I just wanted to respond to. The reason for the intersection at a new location was because of the slopes of Carlos B. When you have queuing, you don't have visibility. And so there was a need, if you're going to add an intersection and add a street light, which the traffic analysis demonstrated was needed, that you needed to have that stoplight at a location that was not on a slope. And that was why we're pursuing essentially and using the easement from PG&E so that you could put that intersection at a location that would be kind of allowed. And so I just wanted to make that clear. The reason we're not using Overlook is because of the slope of Carlos B, and it's flatter when you get a little farther up.
So my comment to that would be, then why can't we redirect Overlook traffic through the development and eliminate the connection of Overlook and Carlos B?
Well, you need a second point of EVA access, first of all. So you have to have that second, in part because of the fire issues you're raising, is that you have to have a second point of egress and have an emergency vehicle access. And then the reason we're not having that be through is because of the strong opposition from the community, adjacent community, for cut-through traffic. There was significant analysis that we did through our traffic engineers to determine that there was sufficient capacity in the intersection at Carlos B to take that traffic. But the community, as you heard from Miguel and Tamara, was very concerned about cut-through traffic. I also just wanted to mention that the project will be paying for maintenance of the park and the trail. So it will not be a burden on taxpayers. It will be a burden on the property owners and the projects. I just want to make sure everyone understands that. So those were just a couple of kind of and we will have, the fire department is absolutely reviewing all of these plans. And so they will be making sure this all, meets fire code, and we'll be reviewing the plan. So just wanted to make sure, clarify a couple things.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ellie Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the presenters. Quick disclosure as well. I have spoken to Sherman Lewis on this project. Don't believe that presents any type of conflict. I have also spoken to Steve Jones on previous projects, not on this project. I don't believe that presents any type of a conflict. So a couple of things here that I wanted to raise. And, I appreciate the presentations we were shown. Obviously, a ton of work has been put into the broader parcel developments throughout the city, as well as this project. And, I looked over the presentation and heard the discussion, and, my big picture thought on it is it's good, but not great. And the reason I say that is I've seen some of the other work of Integral, and I think they've done some really interesting, really innovative projects. But to me, this project just looks very basic. It doesn't look like it has any real strong, unique elements to it. And I'll go into that a little bit further and dig into it. So, a couple things here. First off, on the sustainable mixed use designation of the area. I'm curious what the mixed use here is, because it seems to be single use. And there seems to be a bit of incongruity there, that if you're trying to take people away from utilizing their cars, well, the reason people use cars is because they have to go do stuff, right? They have to go get somewhere. If there's nothing to do in Rose Hills but live in your house, then you will inherently need to use your car to go do everything else. So where is that mixed use here? And what I would like to see, would be nice, would be some type of a retail or services component that people in Rose Hills or in the broader community could use, instead of having to go down Carlos B, go down to Mission, go down to that nice new Sprouts that's going to be at the bottom of the hill. Having something up there for them to access, I think would be nice. And I don't know the viability of building it into it, but again, if the idea is to create mixed use, it's really lacking here. I'm only seeing one use. On the buildings and the design, from a design standpoint, I do appreciate how the builder has made a point to try and avoid just having masses of garages. And I particularly appreciate the motor court buildings. And I live in a similar type style building, and it actually does create a nice sense of community, and it gives a nice streetscape as you're driving by. But as far as the three types of buildings, I'll have to agree with Commissioner Stevens here. I didn't really see any difference. There's great narrative about the differences between these three projects, but I looked at them and they all pretty much look like everything else you see these days, sort of that 2020 aesthetic of Bay Area buildings with a little bit of mixed stone and a little bit of steel balconies, but and some angles. Nothing that really differentiates them, nothing that's really unique about it. So from an architectural standpoint, I find it a little bit bland, and it would be interesting to see if there's a way to liven that up a bit. The density question, this is really a question, I think, for city staff. The master development plan identified this site as able to hold approximately or up to 500 dwelling units. 289 or 298, that's half. I understand that the site is perhaps facing restrictions on the geographic topography. It seems like a huge miss, though, that the master development plan identified 500 housing units, and we're now saying we can only put half of those in there. So curious where the disconnect was, and if there is indeed opportunity to increase that density within the 17 buildable acres. The last thing I will say, the transportation demand management, TDM, yes, transportation demand management plan. I'm curious what that's going to shake out to look like. And I know it appears to still be in development. I live in a community that has a TDM plan. I think it's a great aspirational initiative. The reality, when you're on the ground, when you're living in a community that has it, people use their cars. No one is happy to be spending their HOA money on clipper cars that aren't being used. The idea of a TDM coordinator, again, fancy sounding title. It sounds great that there's going to be someone to help you plan your commute. I don't need anyone to help me plan my commute. I know how to drive to work. And again, that's the actual applicability and the usability of some of these initiatives, I really question. And so I'd like the developer to really think about, well, how can we really incentivize new transportation uses instead of just saying, well, we're going to have a coordinator, but does the coordinator actually do anything, or are they actually providing any value to the community? What I have seen in my single instance here is that the idea often doesn't live up to the reality. So, happy to hear what city has to say on the density question. And then I'd love to hear from the developer, from Steve, if you want to talk a little bit about the sustainable piece of sustainable mixed use, and if you looked at any other ideas for the development to include some type of services or retail or other uses within that same area that that new neighbors or the new residents would be able to use.
Good. Yeah. Do you want to hear from Jennifer and Elizabeth now? Yeah, go ahead. Feel free to answer his questions since it's a discussion tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Or if you want, I mean, it sounds like he was directing his question to Steve, and Steve does have their TDM consultant here. And I will say I've worked in a lot in a very constrained project that TDM was a big part of it. And I just want to, and I'll turn it over to Steve and to Mr. Rainey, who I believe is a panelist here as well, is that the intent isn't to get everyone out of their cars. We are not trying to achieve, zero car trips here. The intent is to try to move, incrementally people, try to attract people that like walkable neighborhoods, that like having clipper car passes, that like having access to some of these things. So it's meant to be kind of a reduction or a mitigation as to try to move the needle in the right direction. But we certainly are not pretending to think that, we're going to get everyone out of their cars. But they are proven to be very effective, and you can adopt them, especially if you fund them and that you're providing providing opportunities that are easy and reliable for people. And maybe I could turn over to you, Steve, to talk a little bit about the TDM and answer some other questions, or if you want.
Quick question on that front. So if I have a Clipper card and I take my car, I drive my car from my home down to the Hayward BART station and then use BART to go into San Francisco, as opposed to driving from my house to San Francisco in my car, do you consider that a reduction in vehicular use?
I guess go ahead.
I was going to say, it's definitely a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. We kind of look at two different metrics with vehicles. So vehicle trips is just kind of the number of trips that are generated. Vehicle miles traveled is the other. I'm the same. I live in Richmond. I am a one-car household, drive to BART, take BART to work. So the bulk of my trip is on transit. That's a meaningful shift in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
What about this question around density? Because I think I had the same one.
So the question... Go
ahead, Jennifer.
So the question of, I think one of the issues is when we created the envelope initially, we hadn't done all of the analysis that needs to be done from an engineering perspective on the manufactured slopes. So there is, so the question of how much was actually developable. And so what we tried to do with our master development plan was to create a large envelope. So the last thing we wanted to do was to kind of create an artificial constraint when we really wanted to emphasize density. So we knew we were creating an envelope that may or may not be feasible. So we weren't expecting to get necessarily that many units, but we wanted to make sure we'd studied it, created kind of an envelope for that. And then Steve can talk more about that analysis, but the reality is that because of those manufactured slopes and the developable, once you net out the streets and the parks and other things, there's just not a lot left in terms of what you can achieve. And so 35 units per acre, just, like a single family development is usually around 8 to 12 units per acre. So with 35 units per acre, it is a very dense, for a suburban location that's this far from BART on a hillside. It is relatively dense when you look at it and compare it to like across the way, Parcel Group 5, a single family development or something like that. Would we have liked to see there's more density? I think we would have. I think there's just some limitations and constraints on, and also the feasibility of multifamily housing. It's very expensive right now. We don't think that we're, it's very difficult. We're having trouble, and we're seeing projects that are near BART pencil for multifamily housing because of the cost of structured parking and the cost of parking, or the structure, just even the type of construction. So to be able to get those types of rents at these locations and be able to justify the cost, it has also some other feasibility constraints in terms of the type of housing that can be built here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Steve on this because, I would think from the developer standpoint, and again, I'm not a developer, but if I'm allowed to build more units, I would probably want to build the units because I can monetize that. And if I'm not required to have parking for those units, well, why wouldn't I add more units when I don't also have to pay the cost of parking, which takes up land and more cost? So Steve, I'm curious if I'm missing something here.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Jennifer hit on a lot of the reasoning, and we've got Mark Butler's on the line too here if he wants to chime in a little bit on the density. But the building envelope or the developable envelope is small, and if we want to have a quaint neighborhood with narrower streets but also have all the parks and just all the amenities, we're kind of left with what we have, which is the 298, and then building up vertically is, as Jennifer exactly hit it on the head, that the construction, once you start getting over 4 stories, it's sort of a whole different world. And I'm not an architect, but it's a whole different set of costs, different engineering, and it ends up not penciling out to create more density. And so that's why it is lower. But 35 units to the acre exceeds the minimum density of this zoning by 10. So we meet the zoning. That's been a goal from day one, that we would meet the zoning, meet the general plan requirements, and we exceed the minimums from a density standpoint. So that's sort of where we are with that. And you had mentioned the commercial site potential, and yes, the name sustainable mixed use is a little misleading if you don't have a mixture there with a commercial site. But as you know, pre-pandemic and especially post-pandemic, retail is difficult and is challenging. And this project is small when it comes to, small and isolated. So having a use that would attract people to an isolated hidden hillside area, but yet only have 298 units really close by just makes commercial difficult. I did run it by a couple of commercial brokers that we know, and they said it would be a loss. Any sort of commercial development in there would be a financial loss. Using Sohei as an example, with an ideal site right on Mission and with more homes within walkable distance, even there, it's been a little bit of a challenge getting tenants in there. They're getting there and they'll get there, but it's been tough. And so just picture, up on the hill, a lot less homes, and with some, expert opinions that we spoke to about commercial. But I will say we do have a community building that will be owned and maintained by the HOA, but it can be rented out to the public, and it is a gathering place. There'll be, multi uses in there. Folks can maybe step away from their own home and maybe do some work in some flex space in that community building. Areas for food trucks to come in, which would be great because that's not a permanent use, but it's definitely, there's enough space there to have gathering and restrooms and everything if they have a food truck day. So there's definitely a central gathering place in the project right next to the park. It's just not a commercial or retail use as of right now.
And Steve, could you just speak to one of the comments about parking and whether or not what's financeable in terms of, why don't you just build more units without parking?
More units without parking. That I can't really answer the cost differential there. Why that would potentially work, and we do know that we have a challenge with our current submittal on the parking minimum that we need to hit, and so there, and we can tweak our plans to meet that minimum with our current architecture.
Sorry, parking maximum. It's a maximum, a limit.
Oh, right, parking maximum. So that we do have a challenge there, but as far as the sort of the cost comparison of building without parking, that I don't really have an answer to that.
And Mark, you have your hand up. Do you want to talk about that? Mark Butler is with Integral as well.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Jan. Yeah, we've studied this, and we were even developing lots for many builders, and we were builders before we formed Integral, and they've made it very, very clear to us that the parking is essential for the marketing of the homes, and they just absolutely have to have it. We're being pressured to provide even more garage space, and it's nice to see that we don't have to on this project. And on the question of the higher density products, yeah, with the significant rise in construction costs, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the more dense, the least valuable it is for the builder, not the other way around. To an extent, the medium density is definitely marketable, but the high density is you would think it would make sense to just keep adding footage, but it doesn't work with the cost of construction today, elevators and that kind of thing.
All right, thank you. Are you done, Commissioner Ellie Sullivan?
I'll let the other commissioners speak. I might have some other things for now, but I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Commissioner Kenda.
Thank you. Just to disclose real quick, I've met with Sherman Lewis as well. I've also walked the quarry myself, and I've spoken to Stephen Jones about this project as well, but I don't think it impacts or would force me to not be able to comment today. So I'm going to comment and have some questions as well. I wanted to start with some of the public comments that I heard and give staff a chance to respond to some of those, especially the campus drive. That's an issue I hadn't heard of yet. Would you be able to respond to that?
Yes, absolutely. And Elizabeth can jump in as well. But I don't know if you heard, but Steve Jones was talking about a LTA or a local transportation analysis that will include an operational analysis of where she's talking about, where Ms. Go was talking about. So we will be studying that as part of this project. I will say that, when we studied and did our traffic analysis, it was very much about traffic impacts in terms of congestion, and the intersections very close to development weren't showing congestion. And so initially that wasn't studied. We're going to add that to this analysis and study it. But if intersections closer to the project weren't showing congestion, then we're not likely to see that. I think what Ms. Go is actually concerned about is not congestion and slowing traffic, she's concerned about speeding, right? And how we traffic calm. And so our public works director, we are working from the city side, given the distance of this from parcel group 6, we are looking at retaining a consultant. We've talked to Ms. Go about actually participating in the process of reviewing that scope of work and working with that consultant to talk about ways to calm traffic in and around her neighborhood, but really as a separate traffic calming project. And so we are working with her in that neighborhood to address those issues, but really more as a city project, not because we anticipate traffic impacts from this development. But that said, we're still going to look at it. We're going to analyze where, those intersections and do that work just to confirm what we think, but we're going to do that additional work as part of the LTA.
Yeah, and I'll just very quickly add, since it looks like Ms. Go is still on the line, Velda and I sat down together at the Permit Center. We went over all the project plans together. Velda, immediately after that meeting, I reached out to our Public Works Department, which is why this intersection, looking at this in kind of a special memo as part of the LTA, has been added. We don't expect, since it's farther away from the project site, to have project-related impacts to this intersection, although there obviously is an existing problem, but data speaks. So we want to see what that analysis will say. So we are looking at it. We do not have the LTA yet, but as soon as we do, I will share that with you.
Great. I hope that is satisfying to the public speaker, Ms. Go. And I also, to me, I'm just happy to hear that that's going to be observed at the very least, and we'll see. Maybe if it's not necessarily as impact part of this project, part of another traffic calming study. I think that sounds like the best way to go. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to uplift, I was reading very closely the Friends of the San Lorenzo Creeks letter, October 9th letter on their update and the revised. I mentioned this in a conversation that I did have with Stephen. And I wanted to just give folks another chance here publicly to kind of talk a little bit more about what you are doing in response to, so Mark or Stephen, what y'all are doing in response to the Friends of San Lorenzo Creek and placement. And as the doctor, Anna, at public comment, yes, Dr. Maris had said that if I remember right, she was describing what exactly the issue is, that sort of nomad's land, as she said, between where the slope is that goes and the setback area. My understanding, having from the conversation, is that it increased costs and time and other commitments to go through certain regulatory bodies to gain approval to increase, to restore those areas. My personal response to that is I think that's worth it as a planning commission to still move forward and recommend that restoration. I think we do have to take responsibility for that at some point. But I would like the opportunity to respond to whatever other concerns or restrictions or constraints may still be in place.
Yeah, and I think Steve should definitely chime in here and talk about it. But I do want to say there is a no man's land between. There's a riparian delineation where you're interfering with kind of environmentally sensitive land, and then there's where the grading ends. And my understanding from talking to Steve earlier today is that they will be looking at restoring between kind of where the grading stops and that riparian delineation. But once you get past that riparian delineation, you get into pretty extensive permitting and potential environmental sensitivity. And the reason there are extensive permitting is because of the environmental sensitivity. And so I think there's definitely room for us to work with a developer to kind of that no man's land between the grading, where the grading stops, and the riparian delineation. So Stephen, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, if I could share the screen as well. See if I can get it up here. This drawing. And all right, can you guys, is it showing the map yet?
No.
No.
I don't know why it's not working here. Let's try this. Oh, I have to click one more button. All right.
All right, there you go.
Okay, you can see the plan now. Okay. So just, as I mentioned, a company philosophy, and I think a lot of developers share our thoughts now is, we believe in total avoidance of any sensitive habitat. It's the right thing to do to not impact sensitive habitats, riparian areas, wetlands, etc. In addition to being extremely onerous process and expensive process. But that's not what the Friends of San Lorenzo Creek are asking for. And we've really, in discussions with Bruce and others and reading through the letters, I think we're talking about the same thing. We're on the same page. I think we're actually in total agreement. So the kind of the fine line in the sand here is this riparian limit that was delineated by our biological consultant. That's the line from which you do anything downhill from here into the creek, it's no man's land. You're really getting into sensitive habitat. It's steep and would require permits from the federal government, from the state government, and would take years and basically be a non-starter for the project. But that's not what they're asking for. What we had done originally is landscape this area where these really tight lines are here, which is where our grading limit is. And this darker line sort of shows the edge of where that grading limit is for the most part. We had landscaped that. Obviously, we're disturbing that. That's within a lot of other setback considerations from the center line of the creek, from a geotechnical standpoint. All of that is within those setbacks. And we had replanted that, as we should. But as Bruce pointed out, there is an area from where we end our grading to the line in the sand here where the riparian limit is, where there was really nothing proposed. Right now it is what it is. There's some plants, there's some trees, but we can absolutely plant from the bottom of our grading extent to this riparian limit. We can put in native plants, temporary irrigation, in that area. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a win-win. I think it achieves what a lot of these folks are asking for. In addition, since we're on that point, the trail is right here, the regional trail that goes around. the trail will be fenced accordingly as needed for safety reasons, and then also for controlling public access down into the creek. Sure, if somebody wants to wander on an area that might be a little bit flatter, we wouldn't put the fence preventing that. Maybe the fence goes out here closer to the edge of the riparian limit with proper signage, etc. So people will be controlled, habitat will be absolutely preserved, and habitat and areas will actually also be enhanced, per the request of Friends of San Lorenzo Creek and the Sierra Club and others.
I'll also just quickly add for context, these plans that we're looking at here were part of a submittal. These plans were prepared like 2 months ago at this point. We've been having ongoing conversations. The project has moved since then, but they're just kind of the most recent version of the plans. So a lot of this is in progress. You will see this in the final plans when we get to final adoption hearings, and we completely hear that, this is a no man's land and this is a real opportunity to repair some of the damage that was caused by the former quarry.
Right.
And I'm also, just if I could chime in, I think I'd like to commit, and I think Steve is open to this, of sitting down with Bruce King, looking at these plans in more detail and going over this, before any sort of, planning commission hearing in the future, that we will sit down and have further conversations with Bruce about these issues.
Right. Yeah. And just let me point out, just reiterate again, the agency permitting process, like Jen said, it's meant to preserve, save, and be sensitive to not impacting those areas, and which again is the right thing to do. And also the amount of work, the amount of dollars, the amount of time, and basically the potential for getting a big no to going beyond this line is something that is a big deal to not just us, but to all developers, and should be to the public. So that is why, our company is committed, why the master plan was designed the way it is that no one, whether it's us or other developers and others, will go beyond this line because of the enormity of what that would create. And so we cannot be in a position to trigger any requirements of permitting from the Army Corps of Engineers, California Department of Wildlife, et cetera.
Beyond that, we have heard that from Bruce and other members of the public that we don't want to impact these sensitive species and habitats here. We just want to make sure we're extending some of that natural landscaping up the hill.
Which we will definitely do. I think we're on the same page.
Okay. That's very helpful. I just wanted to kind of put that out there for the public, and that was, my takeaway as well from meeting earlier. So I appreciate that. The third question here that I have is around the park, the open space park use. I missed it in this, like how parking is going to work for public access to the public park area. Where are people from the public like me, if I wanted to, go to the park and I, rode my electric motorcycle up the hill and went and parked, where would I put it? To go use the park facilities or play tennis, or I don't play tennis, but whatever the heck, those courts are that are used for, or whatever,
Yeah, I can take that. I can share the screen again. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, can you guys see the plan?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah, first of all, don't even think about driving your car up here to visit a park. we want to reduce car trips, but so there's definitely opportunities for biking and pedestrian access off of Palisade, biking and pedestrian access off of Overlook into the trail, into the park, and obviously off of Carlos B here. But then if I zoom in, if someone does happen to have a car, it's a little bit hidden, but there is parking along the entry street there. Being that there's parking maximums allowed, I think technically we might not even have to provide any parking for the park, believe it or not, but there is parking along the street here. And then there's, you can see a little bit more clearly here, actual parking spaces close to the community building here. So that's where there is automobile parking, but again, this part of the reason why these streets are closed off, in addition to to listening to the existing neighbors is to promote the boat biking and pedestrian access and not, push for cars coming in off of these streets. And so it's sort of counterintuitive if these were open that now you are sort of favoring automobiles. And so having good access by other means to the park is what we're really pushing for.
I'll also just quickly add, this is about a 2-acre park. So, as opposed to La Vista Park, which we looked at this summer, which is a 50-acre regional park, we're expecting tons of people to be driving there throughout the community. This is really the size we would consider a neighborhood park. So there probably will be a fair amount of people kind of walking, biking from the neighborhood. And then to Steve's point, for the people that do want to drive, that want to access the Foothill Trail, that want to walk along, the creek and experience some of the amenities up there, there will be this additional parking.
Okay, good. That's helpful. That just to specify for myself that parking right above the community building is available to the public for people who wanted to use the park facilities. Potentially, I don't live close enough to that to make it reasonable for me to rollerblade over there or something. Although I love rollerblading, it wouldn't be. It's a little too far for me. Okay, so that's really helpful. Thank you. And I have one more question on the levels of affordability for the 30 units that are set aside for on-site development. I did talk to Mr. Jones about this. My recommendation is, I'm a little disappointed that they're all moderate income. My recommendation, and I mentioned this to Stephen, would be something more along the lines, because we are overrepresented in moderate income units. I mean, we haven't met our RHNA threshold yet, but relative to our low income and extremely low income units, we are far ahead of those numbers in the moderate ratio. And so, I was thinking maybe something along the lines of like 10 of those units being moderate, and then like 15 being low income and 5 extremely low income, or finding some other ratio that includes deeper level of affordabilities than just moderate income. I think one of the things I had mentioned is like, I probably will not be able to afford buying into this complex. So I think about, and I'm a working professional lawyer, and so I think about other families, and like, I want the access to this community to be to people who earn, less money than even I do. So I think that I would like to see those deed restrictions extend to deeper affordabilities. And I hope that y'all are still in negotiations, I understand, about what those levels of affordability are. So I just kind of leave that more as a comment and a suggestion. And I hope my fellow commissioners will echo those sentiments in their comments, that they support that kind of push and nudge to get that deeper affordability.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in, I'm actually the moderate income, we're actually most efficient in moderate income because low income housing tax credits finance very low and low. And so we actually have the biggest deficiency in moderate income category. And what the council, just because between parcel group 8 and parcel group 3, we'll have close to 300 units of rental housing that'll be low and very low income. There was a real focus actually and a deliberate kind of policy focus on creating moderate income units, not only to meet that deficiency, that's pretty significant, but also to provide kind of initial homeownership opportunities for that kind of middle income range. So I just put that out there. We can pass along your comments to the council. We are happy to do that. But I will say that has been deliberate as to between 3 and 8, where we feel like we have the very low and low. And between all of these projects, we think we're going to be at close to 28 to 30% affordable on all the units, which is well above our 10 to 6% in our affordable housing ordinance, that the council really wanted to try to meet that middle band. That said, we are talking to them about not just having moderate, but also some low income homeownership. So we are pushing for some of that, but I just want to share a little more of that context so that you have that. And so
I appreciate that for sure. Thinking about this in bigger context of the other developments that are coming up and in the pipeline, those are obviously like not all captured in the numbers. And I guess I'm also thinking in my head, like, we're looking at this kind of medium density situation here about the missing middle housing problem. So I understand that, also separately that, we want to be able to expand that for the moderate income that 80 to 120% AMI gap. So like, I'm right there with you. I would still like to see a few of these units be lower income, you know, and I'm persuaded by you. I thank you for that comment. I just personally think that the more the merrier on the lower income spectrum. So
yeah, and we will definitely push. We are actively having those conversations. So
great.
Thank you.
That's my last comment.
All right.
I'll stop now and let other.
Thank you, Commissioner Kenda. Let's see, Commissioner Goldstein. You're muted still there, Commissioner Goldstein.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Didn't realize I had to push more than one button. So as to the housing affordability, the issue that I think my colleague Commissioner Okenda was speaking to is housing inclusivity. And we've spoken on this topic before, where we don't want these islands of communities that are at stratified income levels. So we don't want the very low income to be a community of block-like apartments. I think that history in the U.S. has failed. I know that people know that, and you know, just based on the cooperative project that we saw on, I believe it was Parcel Group 3. Correct me if I don't have the right number, but that Eden Housing, right? And so we saw a great deal of inclusivity there, and that's the sort of thing that I believe my fellow commissioners are speaking to. We want to see more of that. We also think that it's not just about inclusivity, it's about opportunity. And it's about opportunity of access to resources. It's about inclusivity of you know, the neighbors that you have. There's a lot to it, and I don't think I need to tell you that. But just reminding you that that is a priority for us. And I should disclose that I also spoke with Sherman Lewis, and I've previously spoken with Bruce King, and I have great respect for the ideas that both of these gentlemen and their groups bring to the table. I am very, very pleased overall that Planner Blanton and Deputy Director Ott, what you two are bringing to the table. It's clear that your vision matches that of the community, and what you have brought forth in this development, I think, is worthy of praise. There's definitely some room for improvement. I, for one, actually like the architectural style, and I'm only hesitant in saying that because I'm wondering if that doesn't like put me into an age group that my younger colleagues no longer admire. Ali Sullivan, I'm coming after you. I think I'd like to see more on the traffic calming, especially as regards bikes. Now, I understand Carlos B looks impossibly bikeable to me. And, you know, Commissioner Okenda spoke about putting on his rollerblades. Man, if I see you on Carlos B, you're going to be scaring me. That is just very, very steep neighborhood. But I do admire the fact you put on the skates. You know, I like skating also. So I'm not really sure how to deal with that. You know, there's that transitional place from where the street meets Carlos B, that and you know, that access road where it meets Carlos B, and that transition down the hill, where if the residents of that area had an easy way to do it, to get down the hill without using their car, maybe they would opt for bicycling on Mission Boulevard. Maybe they would opt for rollerblading or using some, you know, powered skateboard or whatever. And so I would like you to consider that as you continue to develop this plan. The green energy solar part of this, did I miss that? I didn't see any solar on here, but I can tell you from practical experience that, you know, homeowners coming into a new home, as excited as they are about solar, are not going to want to have to invest another $30,000 or $40,000 in solar. I also think that, and I might be mistaken on this, but The do-it-yourself kits are about a quarter of what the commercial companies are charging to install solar. So I have to assume that maybe it's easier and cheaper for a builder to include that, or if not that, at least put the facilities on the roof. So I'd like you to pursue that. I did look up the fault lines and zones and recognize that along Mission Boulevard there's, the fault lines go there, but I'm not sure if any soil issues have been developed, any studies or anything like that. Just for safety reasons, I would like that explored. I think also only having that one road in and out and that one emergency vehicle access road, that might be a little limiting for the number of residents that we have there. And if there is any opportunity for walkable routes, emergency evacuation routes, and so forth, in case there are fires, we definitely need to explore that. I know the fire department will be looking at that if they haven't already. As to the community spaces, business and services, I think maybe one solution to that is to have some high-end vending machines. Please don't laugh at me yet. The idea here is if there are some opportunities to put in, I've seen in some places where there just isn't enough business to warrant putting in a full-size business, even one that's like a general store. Maybe that's not economically feasible to have something like that there, but there could still be an opportunity to have, a quality vending service, in that community room. I would like to see that explored if there's any way for you folks to take that on. Having some meals, even donuts, the types of things that people will get in their cars and contribute to greenhouse gases and traffic issues and so forth. It just, in a Saturday morning or midday, people typically want to run out for snacks and coffee and that sort of thing. So if there's some kind of, vending apparatus that's available to reduce that, I would encourage that we look into that. I am highly encouraged by the conversation about preservation of the riparian habitat and the grading restoration. I think there's probably some more work that needs to be done. I know you guys are going to continue to work with Bruce King and his group, so I appreciate that. I would like to see something more done, and I'm not sure what, about developing a zero-car neighborhood, and I'm not sure if unbundling the parking spaces is enough. Maybe it is. Maybe it needs to have some other incentives. But anything that we can do to reward people for not owning a car. If they have to use a car, maybe it's a Zip car or a Lyft or Uber or some other. But anything that we can do to really incentivize that, I think the market is probably beginning to be ripe for that. People are starting to realize that building parking spaces is not, we need to grow, is, really where I'm going with that. And I think a lot of people, even in my age group, and stop laughing at me, I think even in my age group, we're really starting to recognize that, what, we're doing more harm than good. And quite frankly, I don't want to be paying for space for parking. I've done it in the past, and now I feel guilty about it. I've got 6 parking spaces at my house, and 3 inside and 3 outside, and I'm actually starting to feel bad about that. And so I think there are people in the community that are looking to buy homes that would be really encouraged by someone saying, you know what, we'll give you a reward if you ditch the car. It means we don't have to build a parking space, and we'll reward you for the difference in cost. And instead of paying $230 a month or whatever it is for a parking space, you're not going to be paying for that because you won't have one. And maybe that'll contribute to your lift cost. And maybe we can also supply you with a clicker card to make it even more affordable for you to get on BART. Anything that we can do along those lines, I think, would be fantastic. If there is actually a TDM coordinator, I'm kind of scratching my head because that seems like an awful lot of money to pay to have somebody on that job. But maybe I'm just not really fully comprehending the whole value that they bring to the conversation. But recommending to the employers that if they have to have people come in to not have meetings at 9 o'clock or even 10 o'clock, If we can shift the time, that takes a whole lot of burden off of our roadways if we can just split that up. So I know it's not always practical to, for every job, but many jobs I spent over 30 years in IT, and I can tell you a lot of times I did not have to be anywhere at 9 o'clock. Most of the work that I had to do is on the computer anyway. And, if you're in a job like that doesn't require you to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, we should be recommending to the employers, as well as the employees and the homeowners, that they not, don't get on the road when everyone else is on the road. So, putting on some kind of time shifting like that, I think would be brilliant. And that's it for my comments. Just one more thing. I love the food trucks idea. I like to eat. There's, no mistake about that. But food trucks are a great way. Zachariah, you just keep laughing at me, man. No, not you. You're all for it. Okay, food trucks. It's a great way to introduce people to some new cuisine types. They seem to be really popular. I know we've had great success with that food truck operation. We had, I forgot what it's called off the top of my head, but I hope to see a return to that and more like it. I think that's a really nifty idea. And anyway, that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. All right, let's go to Commissioner Bonilla.
Thank you. I'll be brief in my comments because a lot of the comments that I've written down about this have already been shared. But one of the questions that I had for Elizabeth and Jennifer is, we saw a few examples of how these communities have been built in other cities that, are like Hayward. What have we learned from those developments, and how have those learnings perhaps been applied to what we're trying to do here in Hayward?
I mean, I can start if you'd like me to.
Sure. And just Commissioner Bonilla, just to clarify, are you talking about some of those other developments that the assistant city manager was talking at the beginning, some of those other transit-oriented developments, et cetera, or just in general multifamily walkable communities?
I think it's something more that's equatable to this, because part of what I'm concerned about is the feasibility of this in a city that has similar geographics and demographics as Hayward, and if it's worked in those cities, and if it hasn't, what have we learned, and how perhaps are those learnings being applied for this particular work session proposal tonight?
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and I can also, if you're wanting staff perspective, which I'm happy to try to give some thoughts to, and then we can also ask the developer, because they obviously develop in other communities, and how they see the Hayward market. Mm-hmm. I can just say more generally, from the type of product that the type of housing that they're providing or wanting to provide here is very much what we're seeing strong demand for in Hayward. I think they're providing a denser version of that, which we like. It looks denser, it is still for sale ownership, not trying to pretend that it's not, but it is a much denser look and product. When you get to that 35 units per acre, most townhome developments are closer to that 15 to 20 units per acre. So this exceeds that and is a denser product. But that is very much what we're seeing interest in from the development community in Hayward. So we think there's definitely a market. If that's what you were kind of asking, we definitely think there's a market. We don't think this product's not going to sell or not be successful. I think other things we're just learning. I do think when you talk about some of the other integral communities is that they are around BART, right? And this isn't. And so I think I have to be honest. That's what I struggle with, because, and what I've said to Sherman Lewis before is that if, I would love to deliver no cars here. I don't disagree with the goal. I think the question is the right site for that vision? I think we can take the spirit of a lot of the things he's saying, really push the envelope as much as we can, but this is essentially a suburban site. It's just so far from BART. We can't get buses up that. We've talked to AC Transit. AC Transit doesn't want to drive their buses up there because they end up burning out their brakes, and it costs more to maintain them. So they actually change their routes to avoid Carlos B for this very reason. So it's just a challenging site from a TOD standpoint. And so I think we're really, I think you're all putting your finger, on the issue is that we are struggling with how do we do something more innovative at the same time when we have a site. And I think we're trying, and I really like all the comments and thoughts that you guys have here. I think the other thing is also, which especially post-pandemic, is just open space. Like, how do we really emphasize the public places here? And I think from hearing comments like that, it seems like we need to really go back and make sure, in terms of the creek, in terms of the open spaces, how are we making those? Because those are really what I think now are going to define our communities more than ever because of the pandemic. And so I think those are really great comments that we'll go back and make sure that we're really emphasizing the open spaces and how they're all connecting, how they could even connect to the other neighborhoods and things. So I guess those are some of my initial thoughts. I don't know if that answered your question, but those are just some initial ideas.
Yeah, another thing to add on, and Steve, obviously you're the developer, you do this everywhere, so you should add your perspective as well. A couple of years ago, we did a Park Nexus study where we looked at park impact fees, which, you know, is a little unrelated to our topic tonight. But the reason I bring that up is because we did a feasibility analysis for 3 different types of development. One was multifamily housing, one was single family housing, and one was like townhome style development. What that analysis found, and again, this was back in 2019, but still what we're also hearing from the development community is the single family home and the townhome style development pencils, the multifamily does not. So to get out of our housing crisis, we need to figure out a way to build more of that multifamily housing. So I think where this is a little bit creative is it takes that townhome concept that's a little bit more feasible financially, but makes it into, you know, a more dense neighborhood. So we're getting that higher density that we would typically see of a multifamily project. But yes, we hear, as we've heard with other parcel group projects too, they all kind of have their unique challenges. There's, you know, a reason some of these sites were, you know, marked for a freeway, but we want to make this is a huge opportunity. We don't often have these large sites, and you know, really trying to come up with good solutions on each where we, you know, kind of do the best solution possible is the goal. But Steve, do you have anything to add to that, to the kind of the issues with this site and, you know, the product types that are most suitable?
Yeah, I'm actually going to defer to Mark Butler, who's been with Integral a lot longer in those projects that were pointed out at the beginning of the presentation that we worked on. He's been involved in those a lot more than I have in my short stint with Integral. Turn over to Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hopefully you can hear me. I've been working with Integral for about 12 years. And like I said before that, I had 20 years with the various builders, KB and others. And so we have done a lot of this type of product. To answer your question, Ray, we just got approval of 948 unit community in Union City next to the BART station called the Station East development. And it has this type of product, but also a lot of that super high density stack flat with elevator product because it's so close to BART. And we're actually building a bridge from our project to BART. I mean, it's literally 1/8 of a mile from the BART station. So there is a place for high density. But to answer your question, what we've learned about this 3-story town product is it's very well accepted. Our Newark transit-oriented development has about 2,000 units planned. Many of them are this exact type of product. In fact, we borrowed this product from Newark. If you've ever been down there, it's next to the Salt Flats over on the western edge of Newark. Very successful, very good sales rates. And what I like about it is it's really good for multi-generational living. A lot of the units are 3-story. We're seeing a lot of the grandparents living in the bottom floor, the kitchen, of course, and the family living's on the middle floor, and then the family, the younger family and children are on the 3rd floor. And that's just great to see, you know, grandmother pushing the baby carriage in the middle of the day as you drive through. And so I think it really is good for multi-generational living. It's what the buyer profile in the core Bay Area, some of the tech workers really seem to like. They like new product. There's some cultural reasons for that, but it's been really, really well received. This particular product, I agree with the earlier comment. It's not next to transit, unfortunately, like many of our projects are. So it is a little bit different than, say, a Union City or a Sohay. But that's why we picked it. Based on
Thank you guys so much for that insight. I think that was very valuable. And thanks so much for the presentations and addressing all the other comments earlier, because I think those have provided a lot of insights. But I think this kind of leads to my concern around the TDM, which is, you know, we've kind of admitted already this isn't really multi-use, right? This is more residential, and it's, you know, there's a lot coming in here, and it's on a hill, and we're not going to be able to, you know, it's not by, you know, BART or by other things like that. So when I think about the feasibility of, you know, not needing a car to live here, it just doesn't seem so feasible to me, right? It seems like you need a car. And I think that leads to the concerns around the limited parking. And, to hear that perhaps what's been successful in these kind of developments before, at least, what we just heard from the gentleman, is multifamily living, that generally says more than 1.5 cars, right? Or 1.2, or whatever the, number is we're putting in here. So I get that parking is going to be very restricted. I think we need to be realistic in understanding that the TDM is going to have to, like, my colleague Goldstein was saying, it's going to have to really incentivize the right behaviors. And we're going to have to start looking at how do we build a community around what we're trying to develop here, in which people could live car free or live less dependent on cars, right? We know AC Transit isn't going to do a new bus up there. We know, BART's not going to build a new track up there. So how do we really realize the vision that we're wanting to see here with, less cars and, more of less of an environmental impact, which I think is great because it all aligns with the priorities of what we're trying to do in these developments. Anyways, I just want to make sure that as we're developing and thinking about the next iteration of what this is going to look like, we're just being very comprehensive in the constraints that we're dealing with to try to serve what I'm hoping is the Hayward community and not the tech community that's going to move in from other areas because those areas have become unaffordable. And now this is going to be where they want to live for Hayward, and we're going to push those in Hayward out, which also leads to a comment that my colleague Okenda had brought up, which is around the affordability of these units. 30 affordable units at a moderate rate. I appreciate that we're looking to deal with moderate, but we have a bigger issue on our hands, which is pushing out our very poor and our most vulnerable people in this community that are deeply rooted here. So I do want us to look at how do we also solve potentially for low and very low income within the general plan for this particular property around affordability, right? I think that there's more that we can do, and I think it's on us to do it, and this is the opportunity to do that. But overall, I think that where we're heading here is in the right direction. I want to applaud both the developer and staff for bringing this in front of us tonight and the creativity, ingenuity that went into this. I appreciate my fellow commissioners' comments, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to, integrate that into this, what I think could be a very promising future for this part of Hayward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonilla. Commissioner Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to start off by saying that as the newest member, I understand that I am replacing someone who had over 20 years of experience as both on the Planning Commission and on the City Council, who was replacing someone who had actually been a city planner. So the learning curve is going to be high. Just bear with me as I ask many, many, many questions that I'm sure you all already know the answers to. So, and I do want to thank you all for your presentations. I thought they were excellent. I learned a lot tonight, and I thought I was super prepared. And then I realized I'm learning so much more even tonight. So I'm really excited. I did also speak with Sherman Lewis this week, and I don't think that will affect my ability to be fair or impartial. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I wanted to find out, in the addendum, it talked about student and faculty housing, and I wasn't clear as to whether or not we still had student and faculty housing as a part of this project. And I was trying to figure out, are those the micro units? Is that what they're considering will be the faculty and student housing? So that was my first question. I wanted to find out if how accessible these and ADA compliant these residents are, these units are. Being 3 or 4 stories high seems like they wouldn't be super accessible to either someone who has a disability or the elderly, other than the micro units. I also was concerned about the impact of the development on the surrounding area as it relates to the fiscal impact. So they're going to put new lights and new streets, and new traffic signals, new, I assume, lighting on the corner of Carlos B. I would hope for pedestrians for safety reasons. I'm assuming there'll be other improvements. And I'm just wondering if we could get a fiscal impact analysis to just see what the impact would be on city services, both short-term and long-term. I'm wondering also, like many of my colleagues have said, I was also wondering how public will the public park actually be? I'm wondering how will the public know it's there? How will they, approximately how many parking spaces actually are there? And is this really something that we are considering a real public space? It does sound, I know someone said, I think Ms. Blanton said that it really is more like a community park as opposed to a really sprawling big park, which again begs the question, is it really for the general public? My next question is, will the affordable housing be across all three styles of housing? If you name something, the penthouse, doesn't sound like there's probably going to be affordable housing in that. So I'm curious to know if there will be affordable housing across all three areas, because I too want to make sure that we don't, it looks like the different types are clustered into different spots when you guys did your presentation. And I want to make sure the affordable housing isn't also in a cluster, that it is across all different styles of the housing. And then my last question, I know I've talked too long. My last question is, what's the process the developer will use to decide which parking spaces to remove to comply with the parking maximum? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks. You want to go ahead, Jennifer and Elizabeth? And
yeah, I'll start, and then Elizabeth and I will tag team on this, I'm sure. But it's really nice to meet you, Commissioner Lowe, and welcome to the Planning Commission. So I'll start with the student housing. This was initially actually one of my ideas when we were really early in terms of trying to think about how to get some density, what to do that would be a little different with CSU there. And so we initially put it in our request for proposals for developers or from developers that we wanted to see student housing. And the reality is when we got proposals back, I mean, I actually called student housing developers, talked to them, tried to see if there was interest. And there was some interest, but it wasn't significant. The proposals we got back, one of the weren't that great of proposals, which is why we rejected them and went through this RFQ process. And when I did a pretty extensive due diligence, talked to developers that didn't propose, why didn't they propose, talked to, developers that didn't even know about the site, talked to the developers that did propose. One of the things that they said was, this site is so complicated where you have a bunch of requirements that we've put on this project because it is a public project. And it was just, they just felt that there wasn't, and they didn't get enough interest. They talked to some student developers that it was just kind of one more requirement, one more thing that by tying their hands that we had to do student housing or a minimum of student housing, that they felt that it really influenced the ability to kind of develop the parcel. So that was why the council actually decided, well, we're not going to make that a requirement. We're still very much open to it. We're not opposed to it, but we're not going to require that there be student housing. That said, I think with the ownership, which the council has really been focused on, is trying to create a range of ownership units, both in terms of size and then also the affordability, is to try to focus on faculty. So I do think our hope is that even though we're not requiring student housing or faculty housing be a part of this, that it will be available for those populations. I mean, especially the faculty, because they too are impacted. And, we want them to be able to buy a home in Hayward and live and work right up the street. And so those smaller units and then the affordable units, I think we will be actively marketing, and we can actually require this as a developer in a marketing plan for affordable housing, that you have to market to CSU, you have to market to their faculty, and we can require them to incorporate that into their marketing plan, which we intend to do, because we do want to try to encourage and incentivize faculty there. So that's the long-winded answer on that. But it is something that we definitely did grapple with and talk about quite a bit. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about ADA?
Yeah. Also, just quickly to add to that student faculty housing, I used to be a public school teacher. I can tell you when I was a public school teacher, I fit within those low income affordability ranges. So by having affordable units on site, that will also help some of our school community, including CSU East Bay faculty. Also, some likely fall within those ranges. Yes, for accessible housing, you are absolutely correct. The accessible units are those ground floor micro units. So some of the townhome style development, and Steve can speak more to this if you would like, are going to include stairs and things like that are less accessible, but we wanted to make sure there was some sort of product type on site where people could age in place. You didn't have to move out, but maybe you move downstairs and then the units upstairs, you can sell that. So there is a little bit of flexibility there. And then also to your question about affordability and where some of these units are, they were concentrated in one area at the beginning of the project, and we've been working with the developer and are actively working with the developer to sprinkle those throughout. So there are some affordable penthouses in the design now. There's also some of the affordable UA Rose units, and that's a little bit still of a moving target. So you can see this in the project plans now, but that's something that will continue to evolve. Steve, I don't know if you want to jump in quickly before we move to some of the other topics. And also, I just want to say, welcome, Commissioner Lowe. We welcome all of your questions. I think it's especially, I get lost in my technical planning world. I think it's really helpful for these public hearings and meetings to have people that don't always have a planner hat on to ask any sort of question. So please, just welcome you to ask any questions you have.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, welcome, Commissioner Lowe. Appreciate the feedback. Let me just share the screen really quickly. It'll just take a minute and just show an exhibit that was part of our most recent submittal. I don't know why it's not showing up here. Let me try this again. Okay. Here we go. So just really quickly, just a quick, simple graphic that was part of our submittal. I'll zoom in on it a little bit. It does show that the affordable units are spread throughout the project. They won't be identified. No one will know which ones are, which ones aren't, as far as once you're experiencing living here and walking through. Most of them are here, but there are affordable units in some of the other buildings, geographically spread throughout. And there will be, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom. So again, it's a little bit of a work in progress, but it's absolutely our intent to spread those throughout the site and not concentrate them in one location. That was it.
Okay, and then looking back over my notes, Jen, let me know if you want to take the lead on any of these. And we still have the question about the public parks and then the parking spaces, which will be removed. Oh, and then the impact on development surrounding the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll take the fiscal and the public park, and then how about you take the parking spaces?
Great.
Sorry, Elizabeth, leave you with the parking.
Love parking.
Anyway, but fiscal impacts, we do have a fiscal impact model that the city manages, and we will look at that and we will have that information. We can provide that information for future meetings. I would say just generally, when you think about the cost, there are also revenues, right? And typically, this is just typical, and we'll look at it more carefully, but when you have units that are priced where these are, that most likely the property tax that you'll get and the sales tax from these individuals will cover those costs. And be a net positive. Probably with residential, it's usually not a huge net positive just because they do end up having their 24-hour calls for service, right? Whereas office users are only in cities for certain periods of time, so you have less impact. So they typically do have a larger impact, but I think given the price points that we're talking about here, will probably be neutral or net positive to the city. But we will run those numbers and we can provide some of that back to you in the future. The public park, I think honestly, we had originally had a master development plan that showed the park in the middle of the development, which we weren't necessarily wedded to. I think there was a lot of discussion both with HARD and the community and Mr. Lewis as well about let's try to move that park closer to where we think that we're actually going to incentivize the rest of the community to use it. it's the same with the retail. Like it is a slightly isolated site. So are people really going to come here for that park from, very far neighborhoods? Probably not, but there's La Vista Park that's 50 acres that they will go to. We do expect, though, that we're trying to place it as close to the mouth of the development so that we're really making it more accessible to not just the residents who live there, but the surrounding neighborhood. So what we're trying, and by having HARD manage it, we also think that will be part of their marketing. They'll be their kind of a regional or kind of more uber local kind of provider of parks. So we're hoping that too will not make it feel private, but it'll be part of their kind of portfolio. So I guess my answer is we're doing the best we can, given that the site is a slightly isolated site, to try to maximize use by more than just the residents who live there.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I was trying to consolidate my presentation, so I took out some notes on this. There will be wayfinding at the base of the trails to make sure people understand the connections to the southern portions of the trail. The trail is at the most accessible place of the development at the bottom of the hill, the most visible place of the development. And again, it's a 2-acre park. In planning terms, we look at that as more of a neighborhood park. Not only is this for the new residents, but this is for people that live in some of those surrounding communities. So they'll be aware of it while it might not draw, other than people just kind of using the Foothill Trail and traveling, biking, walking through the city. It might not draw like a bunch of car traffic from other places because they should be heading up to our beautiful new regional park. Parking, everyone's favorite topic. So this, again, is very unique. Most of our zoning districts have parking minimums. You have to have at least this many parking spaces. This is the opposite. It has parking maximums. We've worked really creatively with the developer from the beginning of this project to figure out, okay, maybe we'll shift some of the parking to on-street parking. So there's still that potential, to avoid the spillover traffic, but we're still meeting the intent of the code. We could do a little bit more shift in that direction, have some more on-street parking. The other thing I'll note, and apologies to Steve, he and I have not talked about this directly yet, but there are 52 tandem spaces, or 52 units, I should say, with 2-car tandem garages right now. There's probably a potential to reduce the size of those tandem spaces. So maybe they're not technically meeting code requirements to park 2 cars, but they're still deeper than a normal garage. So maybe that would, provide the opportunity to park a car in there and store like your bike or your scooter or something else, or just, general stuff in there. But can get us a lot closer to meeting the code requirements for the sustainable mixed use. So the project has evolved. The number of parking spaces, number of units has kind of evolved over the project. So we'll keep working on this. I'm not concerned about us meeting this requirement, but we kind of would just want to hit that balance of meeting the intent of the code, not over parking, because that really encourages people to have cars. But, to Commissioner Goldstein's point, how can we incentivize people? What sort of TDM strategies can we pay people to not have, what does that look like to make it maybe not feasible to be a no-car household, but to be feasible to be a 1 or 2 car household instead of like a 3 or 4 car household?
Right. And I'd like to just chime in here. TDM, or transportation demand management, is often, you can't really talk about incentivizing the use of alternative modes without also talking about parking management. And so typically in TDM, you're talking about the carrot and the stick. The carrot is provide options for people, because if you don't provide them options, then of course they're going to drive. But also the stick, which is penalize people for having a car. And not penal, I don't mean it in a draconian way. I just mean there have to be some checks and some balances on how much parking. But it also that can be parking management. And to get at Commissioner Bonilla's comments, is I do think we need to go back and really scratch our heads, roll up our sleeves on the TDM, and really try to be as realistic, but also creative. And I think parking management can be something, since based on the comments I'm hearing tonight, that we'll want to look at carefully also as part of that TDM plan. And that really, you kind of have to look at both. So we will come back to you with some more ideas on all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great first start, Commissioner Lowe. Thank you for your questions tonight. Okay. I mean, of course, a lot of what I was wanting to talk about tonight has been covered, so I appreciate all of my colleagues' questions. thank you for the idea to sort of push for multi-level affordable units. I hope you'll keep working on that. And I like the idea of just go ahead and including planting those natural plant areas along the creek way and sort of not make that discussion, just make that part of the plan. I think that will be helpful. I mean, I think the plan in general, I mean, it looks nice. It's well balanced and all of that, but for me, it is the location. Like it's a well balanced community with all of the right ideas, sustainability and everything, if it was closer to, say, Mission Boulevard or a BART station or something like that. But I do find this really difficult with it being in the hill and all the discussion around parking and transportation, all that, because I agree to my fellow commissioners' points. Like you kind of have to take out biking and walking. People aren't going to be walking up and down the hill. There are no amenities here. They have to drive everywhere. I mean, I've talked about this before, and I know we're going to be talking about this in a joint session coming up with City Council about a lot of these things. And one of the things we were going to talk about was the parking requirements, because we have this parking maximum, no parking minimum. But in a place like this, if I was a client for this kind of development, I would want to know that I had the ability to park a couple of cars, 2 cars maybe, and my guests to show up and have some parking. And I fear in these kind of developments, and I have voiced this in some of the other developments, that what we're going to do is create a headache for the HOA because everyone's going to be fighting over those guest spots. They're going to be completely parked out all the time. There aren't, there won't be potential spaces for people to have even deliveries show up. So I do feel like you were saying, Jennifer, you have to have the carrot and the stick. And I do feel like this is an opportunity. If we're going to do this and we're going to keep the maximums, I mean, personally, I would like to see an exception on the maximums for this project. And I, like to talk about that in the future, maybe because there is no alternative. The alternative is people parking on Overlook and Palisades. And, we're just going to have neighbors screaming at us and screaming at them. And I feel like that puts everybody in a bad position to do that. And I get it. Believe me, it pains me to say that. We want this to be sustainable. We want to be pro-environmental impact on the communities that we're building for the future. But, today is, or today or next year, 2 years are going to be the day people are buying these units and they need to, bring their groceries up, to their units, and they need to get their, their baby carriers out and all that, because we want this to be a multifamily complex. And it takes cars. And even if people use some of the TDM plans to commute, they still want their cars parked at home to be able to use them on the weekends and go places. And so we're generally talking probably 2 cars, especially for the larger units, not necessarily the micro units. So, and I think, some of the, and full disclosure, I met with Steve Jones ahead of time, and I met with Sherman Lewis as well, like everybody else. And I think some of Sherman's ideas are great. I mean, if we're going to admit that, so some of the TDM stuff is too soft. I mean, we're not going to get people biking and walking here. Why don't we look at something like a shuttle, even though I know that's expensive? I know it would take some sort of subsidy, but if we're going to use this as a unique opportunity to create a truly sustainable community, let's do something that's that aggressive. I mean, maybe that's partnering with a Tesla or somebody that could provide the, some aggressive way to honestly get people out of their cars. Because and that brings me to another point I asked earlier, and I know it was too late in asking, before we make a decision on this project, I really want to see some hard data on how these TDM programs really work. I mean, are they really reducing car trips? Are they really reducing parking, necessity? And it can, and I'd like to see it from similar sized communities, because I know this, works in an area where San Francisco, where you have lots of buses and you can, get to BART and all of that. But I don't know. We've made decisions based on the promise of TDMs, and I really haven't seen any outcome yet. And I'd like to see some real world outcome on that before I make a decision, because otherwise, if this were me, I'd want a little parking garage in the far corner of this property where I know we're not going to be upsetting the neighbors. I know we're going to be able to have guests there. And like everybody, I don't want to see more parking. It's expensive to build and it's not good for the environment. But just being truly realistic about what we're asking people to buy into, and it's going to be expensive to buy a condo here. And, they're going to want to, sort of have the conveniences like everybody has. And so I think, by us asking for people to buy into the TDMs, like, I don't know that I'm willing to buy into that right now, unless, there were proper alternatives like a shuttle bus that could take me down to BART every morning. If I could count on a shuttle bus that I know I could show up every 10 minutes and I'm not having to sort of schedule my whole day around it, and it's going to be easier to grab the car. something like that, something really aggressive and unique is something I would really like to see us look at, like really take this opportunity to find this, like these cities of the future. Because from what I've seen around just the world and the country, that, these utopia cities, the idea of truly getting people out of their cars are still planned cities, still sort of like pilot project cities. And so I just want us to be really honest about that, is what I'm saying. So that's my big concern here, that, people want to live in the hills, they're going to drive up the hill to get there. So right now I don't feel like and even the comments, and I know, Steve, this is early days, so I know these are just ideas, but the comments that with the community center there, that we can have deliveries show up there and people can walk and get their delivery, but that goes the whole purpose, because if you're ordering a whole bunch of heavy stuff that you wanted door to door because you did not want to go to the store and carry all the stuff, you're now going to have to drive your car to the central thing to get your delivery and take it back to your house. And then just the convenience of ordering stuff and having it delivered when you want it. So I appreciate what you're saying there. And I know you're trying to be creative, and I understand that, but and I just want us to be really realistic about people's behaviors. Let's see. I think everything else was covered. I mean, I think, to Jennifer, your point about open space and wanting more open space, I have to admit, when I went up there and looked around the site, I thought, man, open space would be so great to develop this as a huge piece of open space, with maybe some housing around the side. So I think, and, that's to Commissioner Stevens' comments too, that, do we consider what is the true carbon footprint, not even worth it, sort of, instead of creating a true public benefit, a big open space there for people to enjoy with trails. And I know that's not on the table, but, just looking where we are now, I do feel like thinking through these things is worth it. Because if the city's priorities are, developing this land, housing, of course, is a huge priority. We're low on all that. And sustainability, like they kind of are at cross purposes here. And I'm just trying to think through like where the city's priority should be for this particular piece of property, and sort of trying to meet some of the sustainability stuff where cars concerned this may not be the right property to be doing that. Okay, let's see. I mean, otherwise, like I said, the project itself, I like the dog park. I like the balance of the trails that go through the property and all that. Like, as far as that, as sort of an isolated project, I think that's okay. I do like some of the comments from the callers that, we're kind of plopping in a village without some of the village amenities. So the idea of having the central meeting spaces, I think, are really important. And while I understand it would be too hard to bring in retail here, I think the opportunity to have perhaps like a coffee kiosk or something to get people to meet there. And maybe that even means there is some subsidy going on with the HO or something, so that it isn't just waiting for that right vendor to come along, but creating a space for, I don't know, a nonprofit that wants to come in there, and we're somehow, the HOA is somehow subsidizing that to create that kind of village feeling that I think we're looking for people, to have here, because it is so isolated. Let's see. I think that might be it. I know we're late, so I don't want to go too far. But I guess the last thing is, we have these people, like you have been talking to Sherman Lewis and HAPA and I'm sorry, Bruce, I think it was, with the creek. I do want to see those discussions continue before it comes back to us, because, these are people that know this area so well, and, and have spent a lot of time looking at it. And I'd like to see some of those ideas incorporated. And I know you're trying to do that, Jennifer and Elizabeth. So I understand that. And I want to see that continue and to be as responsive as you can, so that, we do get a project that really considers the environmental impact on this area as well. So I think that's all I have tonight. I'm sorry to go on too long. I know this is just a work session, and I know, let's see, I just wanted to see if there are any other questions. So I guess I should ask you, before I go back to, I see I have two more commissioner comments. I wanted to ask you, and Jennifer and Elizabeth, you had given us some guidance on the things that you wanted us to talk about tonight. Do you feel like there's anything that we didn't cover, or anything you'd like to hear from us tonight?
No, I think and I'll let Elizabeth speak for herself, but I feel like you gave a lot of great feedback, and there's also just some themes, right? And that's what I'm listening for, are some of the themes of what we're hearing. And so those are the things we're going to really focus on. And so now I feel very comfortable with the feedback we've gotten. Elizabeth, to you as well.
Same. I think you've all hit on kind of all of the three basic topics: how we feel about TDM and TDM strategies, what's feasible. It sounds like less of the pedestrian and biking, maybe more of like a shuttle or something like that. Parks, we've talked a lot about, and, you know, making sure that people know about the public park and that it's accessible and well marked and all of these sort of things. These connections are emphasized. And then we've got a lot of general comments about various topics that we'll continue to work through. Yeah. And this is exactly the purpose of a work session, is just to midway checking point before things are buttoned up and finalized. Like, let's let you weigh in here so we can make sure we incorporate some of these things into the final product.
Okay.
And Chair Morris, I just wanted to acknowledge that the person who has their hand up is Stefan Rainey, who is in charge of Alltrans, who have been retained by Integral to do the TDM plan. And so, you know, if you guys feel like you want to wait on that, we can, or if you want him to just say a couple things just generally about kind of TDM, he's here and available to do that as well. But if it's late, we're happy to wait too.
No, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind, but if Stephen, if you wouldn't mind just holding on, I'm just going to see it. Hopefully, Commissioner Kenda, Commissioner Benet have some quick comments, and then I wouldn't mind hearing that, and then we can end it after that. I know it's really late. Okay, Thanks. Commissioner Kenda, I think you had your.
Yeah, thank you. I would also love to hear from you, Mr. Rainey. I wanted to just say this slipped my mind because I thought about this when I was looking over the plans earlier. Shh, be quiet. When I was looking over the plans earlier, I'm partially colorblind, so this whole clustering of the below market units on the map that just shot up, I can't actually tell what units are going where. I have a red-green deficiency. So one, it would be helpful. I don't think I need anything changed right now, obviously, but I do see a lot of clustering going on. I can't exactly tell. I'm gonna guess that it's 1 and 2 bedrooms. But I can't tell the difference between those two on the map. I think I'd like to see, that looks very clustered on whatever the cardinal direction is, the right side of the map. And I'd like to see it more throughout the rest of the unit. I'm guessing there are bigger units or something else over to the left, and that's probably why it's not done that way. But living in the Cannery Park neighborhood right now, renting, I see the value of that whole middle section and the central park there. And I'd love to see more integration of the affordable units in that space. So just because I live in it, the community neighbor adding value of making friends, it's just that integration into the community is just really valuable. And I'd like to see that more. It does feel very clustered to me right now. And that's my last comment. I would like to hear from Mr. Rainey too.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner Kenda. Commissioner Bonilla.
Thank you. My last comment is I forgot to say earlier that I met with Professor Lewis earlier today over a quick phone call. So I just wanted to disclose that as part of tonight's discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonilla. All right. So Mr. Rainey, if you wouldn't mind, I think a number would like to hear your thoughts on the TDM ideas.
Thank you. I'm quickly sharing a screen here, addressing your comment, Commissioner Roche, that you want hard data on TDM, and also Jennifer's comment about we need to be realistic. And I wanted to highlight this amazing VMT tool from ACTC, Alameda County Transportation Commission. So they really are working towards that. So this is a map of traffic analysis zones for the project area and downtown. And you can see in green, the per day VMT per capita in downtown Hayward and by BART is about 15. And then as you'd expect, as you get out to Overlook and Palisades here, it goes up to 20. And then as you go farther up the hills, then it gets to 40 VMT per day. So that's sort of when we were talking about realism and not being TOD on top of BART. And then, I mean, I really think this is just such a virtuous public effort. And many counties are building these VMT tools. And the City of Hayward staff helped tweak these tools for the particulars of Hayward. And so you can move to consistent evidence-based TDM, where you'll see on each TDM measure that you can apply, they're the authoritative references from the top minds. And so we're really raising the bar on the quantification of TDM impact with these tools. And further, this tool is somewhat easy to use, so it actually democratizes planning. So HAPA can go out and build their own model for Rose Hill and apply their own TDM measures. So it's, I think, very interesting that way. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Commissioner Ollie Sullivan's comment about let's not have HOA fees that buy Clipper cards that don't get used or people don't take BART. And so we're just sort of thinking very hypothetically at this point about HOA fees contributing, say, $10,000 per month for TDM, and then having kind of a return on investment based continuous upgrading, optimizing sort of program where you measure the results each month of the different TDM programs, and then you can adjust the mix based on the impact and so forth. So we're thinking about my first mile, I'm talking about getting to downtown and then getting to BART, which is actually 1.6 miles. And by Lift XL, that's Lift Extra Large, which means an SUV with 5 seats in it. So trying to have that as a really nimble transit system. And then, for example, Waze Carpool to incent ride sharing, and typically the cost is $3 for each ride and subsidy. Bike incentives also, so we're thinking electric bikes to get up the hill, right? So to get electric bikes to get to downtown and to BART and then back up. And that's going to be a very high touch and holistic effort to make that happen. There's not a lot of evidence anywhere that that's happening yet. We think there's interesting potential for consolidated delivery because there's this scale of 298 housing units with high purchasing power. And so you can bring things to the community. And the ACTC VMT tool is great, but it's got a blind spot on the post-COVID work from home. So we're doing our own calculations on that, which is going to be very significant. So just wanted to assure Commissioner Ollie Sullivan that we're thinking about a very optimized, return on investment focused, transparent program where the residents would know exactly how their money was being spent on TDM and how effective it was. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sounds like we gave everyone a lot to think about. I appreciate everyone's comments. It doesn't look like we have any other comments from commissioners tonight. And again, thank you, Jennifer and Elizabeth. Hopefully this is constructive and you got some good input tonight. All right, looks like we have one more comment from Ollie Sullivan, Commissioner Ollie Sullivan.
Yeah, very, very quickly. What is the timeline again? I know city staff showed that the timeline for them to come back. What are we looking at just over the next couple of months? Can we just reiterate that?
Yeah. So the big key things that we're working on finishing are, one, just getting a complete application. Key components of that are finishing the LTA, the local transportation analysis assessment, and the TDM plan. Those we're expecting to be done this fall, probably by next month. So as you all know, we have kind of a constrained meeting agenda in November and December due to the holidays. So it's possible if the project really, kind of gets everything done really quickly, that we'll come back this year for the next kind of intro to adoption hearings. It's also possible it might be early next year, but we're on the developers on a pretty quick time frame. We have pretty clear direction from you guys and other members of the community. So we want to get on and get moving on this.
And for Steve, assuming that, let's say this comes to the commission before the end of the year, and then you have another meeting. So assume that there's some approval of some sort for something by, June of next year. What's the build out look like? Like how long before people are moving in and this is a complete community?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I don't have my schedule right in front of me, but yeah, I mean, if we get approvals for actual construction to begin grading in middle of next year, look at another year or so into 23, we could start home building. So maybe end of 23, we could maybe have some folks starting to move in. Again, I don't have my exact schedule right in front of me. I apologize, but yeah, just in general.
Cool. No, I'm just curious. It's great to see the nice pictures, but you wonder how long till you can actually walk around in something and see it finished. So good to know we're still a couple years. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for this. And good work session. Thank you. Hope everybody has a good night. And welcome again. Oh, wait, there's still a little bit more on the agenda. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. We have to move on to approving our next agenda item, which is approving the minutes from last time.
We'll move to approve the minutes.
All right. So Commissioner Kenda, we have a motion to approve the minutes by Commissioner Kenda. Do I have a second?
I will second.
Okay. Commissioner Stevens with a second. Okay. Ms. Chan, did you get that?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. All right. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Bonilla.
Yes. Thank you.
Commissioner Goldstein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lowe.
Abstain.
Commissioner Okenda.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens.
Yes.
Chair Roche.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Next we have Commissioner oral reports from the Planning Commission. Jeremy, do you have anything?
Just a quick reminder to everybody that we will see everyone next week at our joint PCCC meeting. I know that you're all anxious to be a part of that conversation. The agenda will be going out tomorrow for that meeting, but the meeting will start at 5:30 and go until 7 o'clock. It's on Tuesday, October 19th, and it will be held virtually via the Zoom app. And so information on that meeting will be provided with the agenda. Again, it's just as a brief recap, that is to provide a status update on the housing element, including the outreach efforts that are entailed with that, along with the environmental justice and climate action plan update. And then we'll also be discussing with the commission the objective criteria and objective residential standards project that we're working on as well in the very early stages of that, but to get feedback from the commission and the council on that project as well. So hopefully it sounds like everyone was able to attend, which is great news. And we look forward to a very productive conversation next week.
Thanks, Jeremy. I also thought in this, sorry, Commissioner Bennett, just give me 1 second, then I'll let you. I thought in that joint session, we were also going to be talking about the issues that we've had about parking and the zero parking minimums and the maximums and stuff like that. I wanted to make sure that's on the agenda.
Specific to parking, not so much, but just specific in general, like what are the objective criteria that you would like our staff and our consultant to be looking at when we start this process? Okay. So again, it's getting feedback at the early stages before we get too far into it.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Bonilla, go ahead.
Thank you, and sorry about jumping ahead. Jeremy, are we also going to have a chance to talk about the affordable housing ordinance and the in lieu fees and kind of our perspectives on how that needs to be changed?
I'll let Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the housing element is a different policy process, but it's absolutely related, right, in terms of affordable housing and the housing element. And so I think this is an opportunity for the Planning Commission to raise some of these concerns and questions for the council. I'm not sure we're not going to get, these are larger policy efforts. We're not going to get to an answer, but I think it's a chance for the Planning Commission to raise concerns with the affordable housing ordinance about parking. Feel free to bring those issues up and make those aware so the council knows you're focused on those. So yes, but the housing element itself won't be solving, won't be amending the affordable housing ordinance. That'll be a separate process. It is in our strategic roadmap and it is planned for to get started towards the end of this fiscal year. So we are moving towards that process, but I think it's a great opportunity. This is your chance to talk to the council about what's important to you. So raise those issues. I think we also want to respect some of the staff questions. We want to give them the feedback they need, but also a chance to raise some of those bigger picture issues.
That sounds good, because I know that this commission was contemplating like writing letters to council before on different issues that were coming in front of us. And we decided not to do that because we were going to use this work session as a way of providing feedback. So I just hope that those perspectives could somehow be captured before the work session. So we're not kind of, fighting over time and who's going to be talking about what and trying to prioritize the topics that we already know are important to this commission, because we've contemplating writing letters directly to council on those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud now because the staff report, which, I just read, or finalized this week, I mean, it does not raise those issues. I mean, it talks about parking being an objective standard. It's absolutely an objective standard. And I think it gives you an opportunity to bring those issues up and let the council know that you think as part of subjective standards process, we need to really focus on some of the parking issues. And so I think that should go there. That said, there are other neighborhood compatibility issues we want to make sure we get to also. And then on the housing element, I think to raise the issues of the affordable housing ordinance and have all of you state to the council, or all of you that believe that, to say, look, we really think you need to focus on the housing ordinance, affordable housing ordinance. I think there's nothing that stops you guys from being able to have that conversation. And it'll be interesting to discuss because it is a little more, the affordable housing ordinance is a little more complicated. But we are working on that, and I think use this opportunity to tell the council that.
Thank you very much. I will add in there, thanks, Jen, is just briefly just kind of update that there's been a lot of, many of you may have heard about some of the recent state legislation that has really impacted the streamlining of residential projects. And very specifically, they do identify the development of objective standards. So I think the discussion next week provides a great opportunity to kind of highlight what are the concerns that you're seeing, but also really kind of, the timing is really critical and crucial moving forward because it helps us align with the most recent state legislation that was just signed into law literally a couple weeks ago. So I think this is a very timely conversation, and I'm glad that everyone is able to participate in that.
And if I could just add, our housing manager, Christina Morales, will also be at that. So she'll be able to talk more about the housing ordinance, and we can, you'll have the expert there to chat about it as well.
Yeah, good. Because I mean, when I'm sort of confused a little bit about how the agenda got set, because there were some specific things that we were hoping to have some real substantive conversations about, like the parking, this idea that we had like zero parking requirement near some of the developments near BART, and sort of how that came to be and what we can do to avoid, that being a problem in the future, because we've come up against this with some of it. So I wanted to make sure like we have that information there, that we're not just airing that grievance, because we could do that by an email, but like to raise point 2 about, affordable housing, that we wanted to make sure that there are substantive discussions that we're coming with, like, how are you going to be, like, what do you want to do to help us solve this? And not us just sort of airing that to give them something to think about it. Because it sounds like the agenda on this got a little bit off in a way than what we had originally intended. So yeah, so I just to raise point into my.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of these processes, these are where we're going to, what I will say is that we can't, having a joint work session, we're not going to be able to solve both of those issues. I think we can add a slide to the PowerPoint for sure that says, look, these are 2 issues that the Planning Commission wants to address with you. We can have that be part of the staff presentation. That way we kind of do that for you. Like, hey, this is in part, and maybe we even remind the council, one of the reasons we're doing this is because of your request to address some of these issues.
Yeah.
My only thought for you is to, you also want to, there are other aspects of the housing element and the objective standards that are also really important. Yeah. And so I also want to, and it's really your choice. If you guys want to talk to the council just about parking and affordable housing ordinance, you can. I'm just also saying there's other important aspects that you may want to leave some time for.
Sure. Okay.
But that's really in your discretion. This is your meeting to have with them.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Commissioner.
So with that kind of being our meeting, Commissioner Roche, are you going to have an opportunity to kind of make sure that you're aligned with the agenda that we're going in with?
Well, Jeremy, did you say you were going to have an agenda for us on this one ahead of time?
Yeah. The agenda is going to be sent out from the city clerk's office, should be tomorrow for the meeting next week for the joint session. Okay. So there will be a staff report included with that, along with the meeting location and meeting information of how you can log in.
Okay. Yeah. Because maybe if there is some tweaks, we could talk really quickly tomorrow about that. But yeah. And a slide for each of those topics would be great, Jennifer, so that they know what what we might be talking about. Thank you, Commissioner Bonilla. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on. So if there's no more staff report information. No. Okay. Then let's move on to Commissioner announcements. It looks like, Commissioner Stevens, you had your hand up. No, Commissioner Goldstein.
Yeah, very good. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I will be with the Alameda County Sheriff's Communications team at Pacificon, the largest event of its type that features emergency communications. So that's the volunteer amateur radio community. We'll have a display of our own there, but there's dozens of others, as well as training programs. If any of you have any interest or want to develop an interest in emergency communications and understand how easy it is to get involved in that, please come see me this Saturday and Sunday. It's at the San Ramon Marriott. That's Saturday and Sunday at the San Ramon Marriott. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. Anyone else have an announcement this evening? Nope. I think I just want to end with, again, welcoming Commissioner Lowe. It was really nice to hear your voice tonight, and we're glad to have you and all of the information you bring to this commission. So thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. And thanks everyone for a great discussion. I think we really did it tonight. And I look forward to seeing everyone on the 19th. And then our next, for anyone still listening, our next Planning Commission meeting will be October 28th at 7 p.m. And everybody have a good night. Thank you.